Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Echoes of the Forgotten Wilderness. I had always been drawn to the serenity of the Elmswood Nature Preserve, a sprawling expanse of dense woods and tranquil streams just outside our small town. The preserve, with its winding trails and towering trees, was a refuge for me, a place where I could escape the noise of life, a sanctuary from the mundanity of everyday existence. But it wasn't until that fateful autumn afternoon that I discovered its darker side, a side that would plunge me into a nightmare I could never have anticipated. It was late September, the air tinged with a crispness that signaled the approach of winter. I remember packing my backpack that morning, filled with provisions, a water bottle, a few granola bars, my trusty camera, and a well-loved notebook. I had planned a day of exploration, eager to capture the changing colors of the leaves and the gentle sounds of nature. The sun hung low in the sky, draping the world in a golden glow, and I felt a surge of excitement as I stepped onto the trailhead. The first hour passed blissfully. I marveled at the brilliant oranges and reds that decorated the trees, the sound of leaves crunching beneath my footfalls accompanied by the occasional rustle of wildlife nearby. I lost myself in the rhythm of my breath and the song of the wind, but as I ventured deeper into the preserve, the ambience shifted. The cheerful cacophony of nature faded, replaced by an unsettling silence that sent shivers down my spine. I paused, glancing around. The world felt different here, almost oppressive. The trees, once inviting, seemed to close in on me, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. A chill crept around me, and I shook it off, convincing myself that I was merely letting my imagination run wild. After all, I had walked these trails countless times. The path twisted and turned, leading me to a small clearing where I had often set up to sketch. As I approached, I noticed something dark marring the earth, a patch of disturbed soil, as if something had been buried hastily. My heart quickened. It wasn't uncommon for nature to reveal remnants of its past, but something about this felt wrong. I leaned closer, the earthy scent mixing with a strange, metallic odor that made my stomach churn. I pulled out my notebook, jotting down observations, attempting to shake the unease. That was when I heard it, a low growl, barely discernible, emanating from the thicket behind me. My heart leaped into my throat. I turned, scanning the dense underbrush, but the silence returned, almost haunting. I was alone, or so I thought. Ignoring the instinct to flee, I raised my camera and snapped a few pictures of the clearing, the unnatural soil weighing heavily on my mind. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to move on. The trail wound deeper into the woods, beckoning me with the promise of more beauty, but I felt a sense of urgency pressing against my chest, an unseen force compelling me to hurry. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the nape of my neck stood up, and every snap of a twig echoed like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. I quickened my pace, trying to drown out the gnawing anxiety clawing at my insides. I finally reached a familiar fork in the trail. One path led toward the river, while the others spiraled into a darker part of the preserve I had never dared to explore. Something compelled me to take the darker route. It was a whisper of adventure, perhaps, mixed with a foreboding sense of dread. I had never been the type to shy away from the unknown, but with each step I took into the shadowy corridor of trees, my heart raced faster. The sunlight thinned, the air felt heavier, and the oppressive silence returned, thick enough to choke on. Hours passed, or maybe it was just minutes. I lost track of time, consumed by the gnawing sensation that I was no longer alone. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against the rough bark of an ancient oak. That's when I noticed it, something small and dark, half buried beneath a tangle of roots. I knelt down, curiosity overcoming caution. It was a small, weathered box, its surface edged with strange symbols. I pried it open, and a wave of dread washed over me as I beheld the contents, a collection of bones, tiny and fragile, seemingly arranged with purpose. I recoiled, slamming the lid shut as if doing so could erase the sight from my memory. What had I stumbled upon? Was this some macabre shrine, a remnant of a ritual long forgotten? As I stood frozen in place, a rustle behind me shattered the silence. I spun around, heart pounding, breath coming in gasps. The shadows lengthened, and I felt the forest closing in, suffocating. My instinct screamed at me to flee, but my body refused to move. And then I saw it. A figure, barely discernible in the waning light, stood among the trees, draped in darkness, watching me with eyes that glimmered like embers. A chill swept over me, deeper than the autumn air could explain. I turned and ran, the weight of something sinister pressing against my back, urging me onward through the twisting trails of the preserve. As the trees flew past, thoughts raced through my mind. I had to escape, had to get back to the safety of the entrance. But the forest was relentless, a maze designed to keep me trapped, and I could feel the darkness pursuing me. The oppressive silence swelled, wrapping around me like a shroud, and I ran faster, the fear turning my exhaustion into adrenaline. It wasn't just the trees that seemed alive, but the very ground beneath my feet, shifting and pulling me deeper into the heart of that nightmarish place. I could hear the whispers of the woods, a cacophony of voices urging me to surrender to the shadows. If I didn't make it out soon, I feared I would join whatever had become of the remains in that box, a part of the forest's dark legacy, forever lost to the whispers of the Elmswood Nature Preserve. The morning sun broke through the canopy, casting a patchy quilt of light and shadow across the forest floor. I squinted against the brightness, feeling the warmth seep into my skin, yet an unsettling chill clung to the air, a warning that whispered through the rustling leaves. I stood at the edge of the nature preserve, the sprawling expanse of trees and underbrush stretching out before me like a living labyrinth. I had returned, drawn by an irresistible compulsion that I couldn't quite understand. My thoughts lingered on last week's expedition. Our group had been enthusiastic despite the ominous weather forecast. We had trekked deep into the preserve, armed with field notebooks and the thrill of discovery. Yet now, the memories seemed distant, tainted by the inexplicable sense of dread that had settled over me since that day. The others had scattered after our initial excitement dimmed, each of us seduced by the promise of uncharted paths. I could recall how, after only a short walk, I had ventured further than I intended, the sounds of my friends fading into the distance. I had stumbled into a clearing filled with strange, twisted trees, their trunks gnarled and contorted, as if in eternal agony. A heaviness had saturated the air, pressing down on my chest. I remembered feeling watched, though nothing had been there, nothing but the oppressive silence of nature. Now, standing at the preserve's edge, I could sense that same weighty aura clinging to me, intensifying with every breath. I looked down the rugged path that led deeper into the woods, its sharp twists and turns hinting at unseen perils. I hesitated. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, the kind that could mask all manner of things. Yet, as if propelled by an unseen force, I took a step forward. The trail was familiar, yet seemed to pulse with an unwelcoming energy. I recalled the laughter from my friends and the way the sun had danced through the trees, but now a deep-rooted anxiety coiled within me. It was as if the woods had eyes, invisible yet omnipresent, judging my every movement. As I moved deeper into the preserve, the landscape transformed. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining above me like skeletal fingers. Shadows pulled between them, and even the sunlight felt filtered, muted. A chill swept through the air as I pressed onward, the rhythmic crunch of leaves underfoot my only companion. The sounds of the forest changed, too. The rustle of small animals had faded. It was as if the creatures had sensed a predator among them. I paused, straining to listen, but all I could hear was the distant call of a crow, sharp and dissonant. It felt like a warning, and I turned instinctively to retrace my steps, but something held me there. A dark instinctual curiosity poured over me, urging me to discover what lay deeper within. I stumbled upon a narrow, overgrown path obscured by vines and bramble. Without deliberation, I followed it, drawn like a moth to the flickering glow of something I could not see. The further I ventured, the more the atmosphere thickened, an almost electric tension sparking in the air. Dread coiled around me, squeezing my heart in rhythm with my footsteps. Suddenly, I came upon a clearing, and my breath caught in my throat. In the center stood a massive stone monolith half buried in the earth, its surface covered in strange glyphs and crude carvings that seemed to writhe and squirm when I looked away. The ground around it was bare, as though nothing could grow in its shadow. My skin prickled, every instinct urging me to flee, yet I stood frozen. As I stepped closer, a foul odor wafted through the air, thick and cloying like rotting flesh. I gagged and stumbled back, my gaze snapping to the forest surrounding me. It felt as if the trees had shifted, closing in, their branches curling menacingly. A sense of being trapped clawed at my insides, and I whirled around, searching for the path back. But the way I had come was gone, swallowed by shadows. Panic surged through me, a heartbeat drumming in my ears louder than the rustle of the leaves. My breaths quickened, and I pressed a hand to my chest, willing myself to calm down. This wasn't the first time I had been lost in the woods. I had read stories about nature preserves, the risks they held. But nothing had prepared me for this. I turned back to the monolith, the glyphs casting grotesque shapes in the dim light. As I strained to decipher them, a chilling sensation prickled over my skin, a gaze upon my back, cold and piercing. I spun around, but the clearing was empty, just the oppressive silence of the forest bearing down on me. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, too faint to make out but insistent, weaving through the trees like a haunting melody. I felt it resonate in my bones. It beckoned. My mind screamed to turn and run, but my body betrayed me, drawing closer to the stone. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around me like tendrils, urging me to listen. "What do you want?" My voice trembled, swallowed by the shadows. The forest held its breath, and in that moment, I understood I was not alone. Something ancient lurked within this preserve, something that had seen countless souls wander into its embrace. Desperately, I fumbled for my phone, but the screen remained dark, no signal, no lifeline. With every instinct screaming at me to escape, I turned to flee, only to find the shadows shifting again, twisting the path into a maze. I had to get out. I had to. I bolted, branches snagging at my clothes, the whispers rising to a cacophony, consuming my thoughts. I ran without direction, driven by sheer terror, the only sound my ragged breaths and the frantic thud of my heart. And just as I thought I might break free, the forest closed in around me, deeper and darker, forever holding me in its thrall. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the thick underbrush of the nature preserve. The oppressive weight of the silence hung around me, disturbed only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant animal call. I had hoped that spending time in the tranquil embrace of nature would help me clear my mind, but the encroaching darkness felt more like a tightening noose than a comforting blanket. After my unnerving encounter near the old oak grove, I had retreated deeper into the preserve. The atmosphere shifted subtly, becoming heavier as the trees closed in, their gnarled branches clawing at the fading light. I paced along the worn trails, gravel crunching beneath my boots, my thoughts consumed by questions. Had I truly seen what I thought I had? No, it couldn't have been real. Just a trick of the light, a manifestation of my overactive imagination. But then, that hollow echo of a voice haunted my memory, a voice I couldn't place, but one that had called my name, luring me deeper into the woods. I shook my head, trying to dispel the memory. I needed to focus, to remain grounded. The preserve was vast, ostensibly untouched by the outside world. It was both a sanctuary and a maze, and I felt hopelessly lost. As dusk settled, the air cooled. I stopped by a small clearing, taking a moment to catch my breath and gather my thoughts. A damp chill seeped from the ground. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and scanned the area for any signs of life, but there was none, only the fading whisper of the wind through the trees. It was unsettling how quiet it had become, even the birds had hushed. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a fleeting shadow gliding past the edge of the clearing. My heart raced as I turned, expecting to see a deer or some other woodland creature, but the space remained empty. Was I imagining things? The thought dug deep into my mind. The isolation must be getting to me. I shook off the feeling and pressed on, deeper into the undergrowth. The light was fading fast, and I knew I should head back, but a compulsion drove me forward, a pull almost magnetic. I needed to understand what was happening. I stumbled upon a narrow path obscured by low-hanging branches. With every step, I felt as though I was venturing into the heart of something ancient and alive. That was when I heard it again, the voice. This time it was clearer, more insistent. Over here, the call was soft but carried an urgency that spiked my adrenaline. I hesitated, caught between fear and intrigue. Who was it? What did they want? Following the sound was a mistake, I realized too late. As I stepped further off the path, I felt the air grow thick, as if something were wrapping around me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. The trees seemed to lean in, crowding me. The voice beckoned again, closer this time, and I pressed on, pushing through the bramble as I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" My voice echoed with a quiver that betrayed my fear. There was no response, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows danced around me, the fading light casting sinister shapes that seemed to shift as I moved. I fought the urge to turn back, my curiosity urging me forward into the unknown. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the distance, just beyond the reach of the dying light. My stomach dropped. It was shrouded in shadow, indistinct, but unmistakably human. I stepped closer, trying to discern details, but the closer I got, the more the figure seemed to blur, as if it were dissolving into the darkness itself. "Who are you?" I called again, desperation creeping into my voice. "Help," it replied, the words sounding distorted, almost a whisper carried on the wind. "Please, help me." Every instinct screamed for me to run, to flee this place and the eerie apparition before me. But the plea resonated within me, and against my better judgment, I stepped forward, drawn into the darkening woods. "What do you need?" As I neared the figure, the air grew colder, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. The trees around me creaked ominously, as if warning me to turn back, but I pressed on. I was now just a few feet away, straining to see beyond the veil of shadows. And then, the figure turned, its face catching the last remnants of twilight. My heart stopped dead. The features twisted in a grotesque parody of human likeness, eyes sunken and hollow, mouth curled into a disquieting smile that revealed jagged teeth. "I've been waiting for you," it hissed, each word stretching the silence into something tangible and dreadful. A surge of panic erupted within me, and I stumbled backward, trying to escape the suffocating grasp of fear. As I turned to run, the underbrush snagged at my clothes, clawed at my skin. The voice rose behind me, louder now, echoing through the trees. "Stay with us." I raced into the darkening woods, branches whipping against my face, the shadows closing in. I could hear the rustle of movement all around me, the oppressive weight of unseen eyes tracking my flight. I needed to find my way back, needed to escape this nightmare that had ensnared me. I ran, breathless and terrified, not daring to look back. The sounds of the preserve morphed into something monstrous, a cacophony of whispers and rustling leaves, pulling me deeper into their grasp. The path was lost to me, swallowed by the shadows, and I wondered if I would ever find my way out again. The sun had begun its descent when I reached the edge of the nature preserve. Though familiar with its trails and hidden clearings, a shiver ran through me. The air felt thicker than it had the day before. An ominous stillness enveloped the trees, as if the world were holding its breath. I had witnessed nature's beauty countless times, but this evening was different. Shadows clung to the trunks, elongating like dark fingers stretching toward me. I ventured deeper, my footsteps muffled by the leaf-strewn path. Memories of my previous escapades flooded back, days spent chasing the sounds of rustling critters and the thrill of spotting elusive deer. But tonight, unease settled in my stomach, feeding off the creeping silence. I clutched my backpack tighter as if it could somehow shield me from the growing dread. I had come to the preserve to escape my life, to forget the weight of recent events. My brother's sudden disappearance still loomed over me like a dark cloud. The search had turned fruitless, the authorities had shifted focus. Only my determination remained, an ember of hope that perhaps I could find him myself. I had heard whispers of sightings, faint traces of him lingering in these woods. But as I walked deeper into the underbrush, I questioned my resolve. I paused, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. The trees stood too still, their branches unmoving, as though they conspired against me. The path forked ahead, marked by a faded sign that read Whispering Pines Trail. I had never taken that route before. Curiosity wrestled with caution, and I felt an inexplicable pull toward the trail. With a decisive breath, I stepped onto the narrow path. As daylight waned, the forest transformed. Twisted roots rose like claws around my ankles, and the air thickened with the sweet scent of decay. I pressed on, each step accompanied by the rustle of leaves overhead, an unsettling symphony that played in time with my quickening heartbeat. The sun was now a mere memory, and shadows stretched like claws, grasping at my legs, urging me to turn back. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement among the trees. Heart racing, I pushed forward, convinced that it could be him. The thrill of hope ignited a reckless courage within me. I called out his name, voice cracking against the suffocating silence. Only echoes returned, taunting me. I stumbled into a clearing, its center dominated by a gnarled tree that loomed like a guardian of secrets. Its bark was mottled and split, revealing dark crevices that seemed to harbor a pulse of their own. Among the roots, I noticed something glimmering, a badge, the kind that belonged to park rangers. My breath hitched as I recognized it. It was my brother's. A chill crept down my spine. I knelt to pick it up, fingers trembling. Panic flooded my mind. Had he been here? Had he wandered off the path, become lost? My heart pounded louder, drowning out the whispers of the wind. The feeling of being watched intensified, a palpable presence lurking just beyond the shadows. Then I heard it, a soft rustling, not from the trees but from behind me. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. Nothing. Just shadows stretching and shifting under the moon's faint glow. I shook my head, chastising myself for letting fear cloud my thoughts. But as I stood, the feeling of something lurking behind me continued to gnaw at my sanity. I turned back to the badge, trying to breathe through the rising fear. Just as I was about to pocket it, a sound split the air, a low, guttural growl that made my blood run cold. I froze, mind racing back to the stories whispered around campfires, tales of creatures that roamed the preserve, guardians of the wild. Panic surged within me. I stumbled backward, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. There, just within the edge of the clearing, I caught a glimpse of something, no, someone. My heart raced as I caught sight of a figure, hunched and twisted, almost blending with the gnarled tree behind them. I squinted, breath hitching in my throat. Could it be Jake? I whispered, voice trembling. The figure remained still, as if contemplating my words, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition. But then, without warning, it lurched forward, a grotesque mask of dirt and leaves obscuring its features. I stumbled back, mouth agape, instinctively raising the badge as if it could protect me from whatever this was. The creature moved with a speed I didn't expect, darting toward me, its ragged breaths echoing through the air. I turned to run, heart hammering against my ribs, but it was behind me, relentless. I could hear the snapping of twigs and the rustle of leaves as it pursued. The world around me blurred into chaos, the trees morphed into monstrous shadows, and I was alive only in the desperate rhythm of my heartbeat. I veered off the path, desperate to lose it, losing myself in the tangled underbrush. Branches whipped at my face, and I stumbled, hands outstretched to break my fall. I hit the ground hard, a sharp pain lancing through my knee, but I didn't stop. I crawled, dragging myself through the thick foliage, trying to escape the terror that hunted me. It was closing in. With every ounce of strength, I pushed myself up and dashed into the depths of the preserve, the trees closing in around me, their whispers now mocking. I was no longer searching for my brother. I was simply trying to survive. Every rustle, every whisper was amplified, and in my frantic escape, I feared I was losing my grip on reality. The darkness enveloped me, and I realized that I might not leave these woods at all. My brother was gone, and in this twisted place, I was beginning to fear I would join him. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced menacingly among the trees. I had meant to leave the nature preserve long before nightfall, but the inexplicable pull of the place had kept me moving deeper into the woods. Now, as the darkness enveloped me, I felt the first twinges of panic swirling in my gut. I recalled my earlier days hiking in these woods, the trails well marked, a sanctuary of flora and fauna. When I had first visited, I marveled at the richness of life, the vibrant colors of wildflowers, and the gentle rustle of leaves. But now, each creaking branch sounded like a warning. The evergreen scent of pine, once comforting, turned oppressive, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I had come back to the preserve to clear my head, to escape the chaos of reality that had become my existence since the accident. But the further I wandered, the more I began to question my decision. I had seen signs of human life earlier, old picnic tables, a weathered footbridge, remnants of a campfire. Now, it felt like I was alone in a world where time and space had folded in on themselves. I pulled out my phone, the bright screen offering scant comfort as its battery icon flashed ominously. I cursed under my breath. I hadn't thought to bring a charger. It was a mistake I wouldn't make again. The last thing I wanted was to be stranded in this suffocating darkness. My fingers trembled as I fiddled with the device, pulling up the map feature. It blinked and stuttered, pixelated shadows mocking me even as I drained its precious battery. And then I heard it, a sound in the distance. Soft, almost melodic, yet laced with something disquieting. It was a low hum, like a chant rising and falling with the wind. I had read about the strange occurrences that happened in these woods, tales of other hikers who had vanished without a trace, their last moments perhaps spent entranced by the very sounds I now heard. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I tucked the phone back into my pocket. With deliberate slowness, I turned away from the noise. Each step felt weighted, my feet dragging through the fallen leaves. I did not dare to look back, even as the chant grew louder, wrapping around me like a shroud. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their gnarled branches reaching out, whispering secrets I couldn't decipher. I quickened my pace, breathing heavily as I navigated the uneven ground. As I stumbled through the underbrush, I caught a glimpse of movement to my left. My heart thudded in my chest as I froze, straining to see through the dense foliage. A figure flickered at the corner of my eye, but when I turned my head fully, nothing was there. I shook my head, scolding myself for letting my imagination take control. It was just the darkness playing tricks, I assured myself, though the unease in my gut grew stronger. Moving faster now, I broke into a near run, branches scratching at my arms like skeletal fingers. The path ahead began to twist and turn, leading me deeper into the heart of the woods. My breath came in ragged bursts, and I had to fight the urge to scream. I was so lost in my thoughts, in my fear, that I nearly tripped over an exposed root, stumbling to regain my balance. Ahead, I spotted a clearing, a faint light flickering in the distance. Relief washed over me. Perhaps I would discover a way out of this nightmare. I surged forward, every ounce of fear propelling me closer to that beacon, the hum now replaced by an unsettling silence that made my skin crawl. As I reached the edge of the clearing, I halted, my heart hammering against my ribs. The source of the light wasn't a way out, it was a campfire, surrounded by what appeared to be a circle of people, their faces obscured by shadow. They sat in silence, staring at the fire, their bodies swaying slightly as if caught in some trance. I felt an instinctive urge to flee, to turn back and retreat into the safety of the woods. But something held me rooted to the spot. I squinted, trying to catch any hint of their features, yet they remained just beyond the reach of the flickering flames. My mind raced, conjuring horror stories of cults and rituals, memories of warnings that should have haunted me in my earlier explorations. The hum returned, more insistent now, weaving through the air, wrapping around my consciousness like a snake. I fought to break its grip, but I felt a pull, an unyielding desire to step into the light, to join the figures by the fire. I stumbled forward, drawn by something primal, something deep within me that whispered promises of acceptance and belonging. But as I crossed the threshold of the clearing, the energy shifted. The figures turned toward me in unison, their faces illuminated by the firelight. My breath hitched as I realized they were not human. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and their mouths twisted into wide grins that revealed rows of sharp teeth. Panic surged, and instinct took over. I spun on my heel, sprinting back into the darkness of the trees. The chant erupted behind me, rising into a cacophony of sound that drove the adrenaline through my veins. I pushed through the underbrush, branches tearing in my clothes as I fled, the echo of their laughter trailing after me like a sinister melody. The light from the campfire faded behind me, swallowed by the dark. But I could still feel their eyes on me, could still hear their voices calling, urging me to return. I ran until my legs screamed and my lungs burned, determined to escape the grasp of whatever had lured me into that clearing. But as I stumbled deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not merely lost in the woods. I was lost in something far darker, something that would not let me go easily. Story 2, Behind the Badge, Terror Unmasked. The night air was thick with a sense of foreboding as I stepped out of my car. The blue and red lights of the police cruiser flickered like sinister fireflies against the surrounding trees, casting distorted shadows that danced across the pavement. I had heard the words crime scene in the dispatch call, but standing here, I felt the weight of something much darker. As a detective with the Maplewood Police Department for nearly a decade, I had seen my share of gruesome scenes, but there was always a buffer, a sense of distance, a layer of professionalism that separated me from the horror. Tonight, however, I felt that layer thin, as if the cold fingers of death had reached out and grasped at my throat. I approached the perimeter, where Officer Jennings, a fresh-faced recruit, stood guard. His eyes were wide, darting nervously as he flicked his flashlight toward the ground. "Detective Harper," he said, catching sight of me. It's bad. Really bad." I nodded, my heart heavy. "Show me." He led me past the caution tape, the smell of damp earth mingling with something metallic and sickening. As we stepped into the clearing, the glow of the crime scene lights illuminated the body. I had expected violence, but nothing prepared me for the sight of the victim sprawled across the ground, limbs contorted awkwardly, as if rearranged by a cruel puppeteer. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair splayed around her like a halo of despair. A jagged tear marred her pale skin, crimson pooling beneath her in the soil, mingling with the fallen leaves. Instinctively, I took a step back, blinking against the horror. Who found her? I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. Some hikers, Jennings replied, his voice shaky. They thought she was just sleeping at first. I crouched down, examining the area around her. The ground was disturbed, the leaves torn and scattered. I noticed a small object half buried in the dirt, a pendant, glinting in the harsh light. I reached for it, brushing away the grime. It depicted a twisted tree, its gnarled roots tangling together in a way that felt symbolic, as if it were trying to escape the earth. Did you check her belongings? I asked. Not yet. We were waiting for you. I straightened, the pendant heavy in my palm. It felt wrong, out of place, as if it didn't belong to the scene of tragedy before me. I pocketed it, a decision made instinctively, knowing it could be a vital clue. As I turned my attention back to the body, a shiver crawled down my spine. I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, scanning the tree line at the edge of the clearing. Shadows lurked there, but nothing moved. I dismissed the feeling. The woods were always unsettling at night. Any witnesses? I asked, breaking the uneasy silence. Not yet. We're still interviewing the hikers, but they didn't see anything unusual before they discovered her, Jennings reported, shifting nervously from foot to foot. I felt a knot of frustration tighten in my gut. In a town as small as Maplewood, we needed to act fast. The longer a killer roamed free, the riskier it became for everyone. I motioned Jennings to follow me back to the cruiser, where the radio crackled with updates. As I opened the door, the chill of the night seeped into my bones. I had learned long ago that silence could be as dangerous as any weapon. It wrapped around you, suffocating and ominous. I pulled out my notepad, my pen trembling slightly in my hand as I began to write down the facts we had so far. Detective Harper? The tentative voice of Jennings interrupted me. I looked up, seeing his nervous demeanor. What is it? I don't think I can stay here much longer. Something just feels wrong. I paused, weighing his words. I had felt it too, the creeping sense of dread that whispered dark possibilities. But I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. Not now. Stay focused, Jennings. We need to gather all the evidence we can. As he nodded, I felt a sinking sensation in my gut. I had never been one to scare easily, but something about this case knotted me. The darkness seemed deeper, the woods more alive. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened here was just the beginning. The hours passed in a blur, and the initial shock began to dull, replaced by cold determination. The coroner arrived, and with him came the promise of answers. Yet as they began their work, I found myself withdrawing into my thoughts, the rhythmic sounds of the scene fading into an unsettling silence. Then, just as the coroner called for another officer, the radio crackled to life with a reverberating urgency. Dispatch to all units. We have a report of a suspicious individual near the forest entrance. Proceed with caution. My heart raced as adrenaline surged through me. We were dealing with something larger than a single murder. I exchanged a glance with Jennings, who looked as unsettled as I felt. Let's go, I commanded, determination pushing past the icy grip of fear. We jumped into the cruiser, the engine roaring to life as I sped toward the entrance of the woods. I had no idea what awaited us, but something in the air felt electric and alive, a portent of the horror yet to come. The morning light slanted through the grimy window of my bedroom, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. Despite the warm sun, a chill clung to me, a remnant of the nightmare that had slipped through the cracks of sleep. I had spent hours tossing and turning, replaying the shrill sound of the police sirens that echoed through my mind. Their arrival had been sudden and jarring, filling the air with a sense of urgency that I could hardly shake off. I got up and pulled a tattered shirt over my head, the fabric rough against my skin. My mind was still hazy, struggling to comprehend what had happened the night before. The news had reported a string of unsolved disappearances, all connected by a single thread. The victims had last been seen near the outskirts of town, near the old quarry. I had brushed it off initially, chalking it up to the latest scare crafted by the media. But as the hours wore on, the stories coalesced into something darker, something that began to gnaw at my gut. My phone buzzed insistently on the nightstand. It was Detective Harris, a friend of my father's and one of the few people I trusted in the department. He had called earlier in the evening, asking to meet me. I knew that whatever he wanted to discuss was serious. He wouldn't have asked otherwise. I hesitated for a moment, but unanswered questions compelled me to pick it up. "Hey, it's me," I said, trying to sound more composed than I felt. "I need you to come down to the station," he said, his voice heavy with foreboding. "It's about the disappearances. We've got a lead." The knot in my stomach tightened. What kind of lead? I can't say over the phone. Just come as soon as you can. I swallowed, grappling with a sense of dread that settled like a stone in my chest. Since the day I had been pulled into the chaos that surrounded my family after my father's death, I had tried to steer clear of the darkness that loomed over the police department. Yet curiosity mingled with fear, driving me to grab my keys and head out. The police station was a few blocks away, its faded facade looming against the morning sky. Stepping inside, I was greeted by the familiar, sterile atmosphere. The scent of stale coffee hung in the air, mingling with the sound of buzzing fluorescent lights. Officers moved about, their faces drawn tight with worry, whispers threading through the hallways like an unseen specter. Harris met me near the entrance, his expression grave. He led me deeper into the building, past rows of desks cluttered with files and paperwork, until we reached a small conference room at the back. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing off the noise from the precinct. "Have a seat," he said, motioning toward a chair. I wish I had better news. I sat, my heart pounding as he placed a folder on the table between us. "What do you have?" He opened the folder and slid a series of photographs across the table. I felt my stomach roll as I forced myself to look. The images were graphic crime scene photographs depicting the remnants of the last known victim. A young woman, her face a pale mask of terror and confusion, lay sprawled among the debris of the quarry. I gripped the edge of the table, wrestling with the urge to look away. "We found her last night, about 2 miles from the quarry," Harris said, his voice steady despite the horror of the content. "This makes 6 since the first girl went missing." I shook my head, the weight of the information settling heavily on my chest. But how is this possible? 6 disappearances in less than a month? Harris leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We think it might be connected to a group we've been watching. They've been operating on the fringes, preying on vulnerable people. But we've never seen anything like this before. Why haven't you gone public?" I asked, the thought of the community remaining unaware sending a shiver down my spine. "Because we're not sure how deep this goes. We've lost a few officers already, strange accidents, disappearances of their own. Our investigation has hit snags every time we get close. Whoever is behind this knows how to cover their tracks." A silence fell between us, thick with the implications of his words. I felt the dread wrapping around me, constricting my breath. The fear I had brushed aside in the morning began to resurface, a creeping sense that something was very wrong in our town. "Is there any connection to my father?" I asked, the question thick with unresolved grief. "He was involved in cases like this." Harris met my gaze, the weight of his silence answering me. "We're looking into it, but it doesn't look good." I traced my fingers along the edge of the folder, feeling the sharpness of reality cut through the fog of my memory. The wall seemed to close in, the air thickening as the realization dawned on me that the darkness I had tried to escape might be pulling me back in. "What do you need from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to help us. We need someone who can move through the shadows. If there's anything to be uncovered, you might be able to find it." The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. I nodded, knowing that the line between safety and danger had blurred. I was already entangled in the web. It was too late to turn back now. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of day that felt like it was perpetually late for something. I stood by my kitchen window, staring out at the ashen sky while the kettle boiled. I had scarcely slept, the events of the previous night replaying in my mind like a broken record. The phone call with Officer Dale still echoed in my ears, his voice taut with desperation and a hint of something darker, something I couldn't quite place. "Don't go out after dark," he had said, his tone both urgent and grave. "It's not safe." I poured myself a cup of coffee, the steam warming my face temporarily, but the chill remained, soaking deep into my bones. The local news had blared with reports of a missing girl, and the fear that had gripped the town was palpable. I hadn't known her, but her name, Jody, lingered in my mind like an unwelcome guest. At noon, I decided to take a walk, hoping that fresh air would clear the fog that had settled over me. The streets were quiet, the usual chatter of neighbors replaced by nervous whispers and the occasional siren wailing in the distance. As I walked past the park, I noticed a cluster of people gathered beneath the old oak trees. Curiosity prickled in my skin as I approached, the crowd parting to reveal a makeshift memorial of candles and photographs. It was Jody. I could feel the eyes of the onlookers boring into me, the weight of their sorrow mingling with suspicion. I glanced at her photo, a smiling girl with bright blue eyes, and my stomach knotted. The sun fought its way through the clouds, casting an eerie glow on the scene as if it were all a grotesque tableau. I took a step back, the urge to flee overpowering. On my way home, I passed a patrol car parked at the corner. Officer Dale sat inside, his expression grave. He glanced up as I approached, and I felt the tension in my stomach tighten. I wanted to ask him what was happening, what had really happened to Jody, but the words caught in my throat. "Morning," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How are you holding up?" I shrugged, unable to muster a response. The silence lingered, thick and uncomfortable, before Dale cleared his throat. "You should stay inside as much as you can. We're doing everything we can," but his voice trailed off, the weight of unspoken truths hanging in the air between us. "I heard you found something," I said, attempting to sound casual, but the tremor in my voice betrayed me. Dale's gaze shifted, glancing toward the park, then back to me. "We have leads. That's all I can say right now." He hesitated, then added, "Just don't open your door for anyone you don't know." The warning sent a chill coursing through me. I nodded, retreating from the conversation and from him. I dreaded what the next few days might bring, and the thought of Jody's face wouldn't leave me. That evening, my phone rang, shattering the oppressive silence. I answered hesitantly, my heart racing. It was Dale again, his voice strained. "I need you to listen carefully. Can you meet me at the old station? It's important." A swell of anxiety rose within me. "Is this about Jody?" I pressed. "Just meet me." "Please," he insisted before hanging up abruptly. The old station had been abandoned for years, a relic of the town's past. I parked in the lot, my heart hammering in my chest as I stepped out of my car. The air was thick with dread, and the shadows seemed to reach out as I approached the building. I could see Dale's cruiser parked in the flickering light of a lone street lamp, the glow casting long, distorted shadows. I hesitated at the door, the wooden frame creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the scent of mildew and decay. "Dale?" I called, my voice echoing too loudly in the darkness. He stepped into the light, his face drawn, eyes haunted. "I'm glad you came," he said, the burden of his words evident. "There's something we need to discuss. Something about Jody." "What is it?" I pressed, the urgency in his tone heightening my anxiety. He gestured for me to follow him into the main room, where the remnants of old desks and equipment lay strewn about. "We found something," he began, his voice low. "We found her cell phone in the woods. But there's more." There was a message. Before he could finish, the air shifted, a chill creeping up my spine. I glanced toward the windows, shadows moving outside that shouldn't be there. "Dale, do you hear that?" He turned, his face paling. The sound of footsteps echoed closer. There wasn't just one set of footsteps, it was a chorus of them, converging on the old station. An icy fear settled over me, and I stepped back. "We need to get out of here." "Stay calm," he said, though I could see the panic in his eyes. "Stay low." I crouched behind a desk, my breath shaky as the footsteps grew louder. There were voices now, low murmurs that sent shivers down my spine. "They can't find us here," I whispered, the dread settling heavily in my chest. Dale nodded, but his expression betrayed him. The shadows outside thickened, and I could feel the darkness creeping in, reaching for us. I clutched my phone tightly, the battery dead, rendering me cut off from the outside world. As the voices grew clearer, I strained to make out the words, and adrenaline surged through me. "Check inside," one voice commanded. "If she's here, we can't let her go." I exchanged a terrified glance with Dale just as the door rattled with a force that shook the old building. We were trapped, and the only question that lingered in my mind was whether we would emerge alive, or if we were about to become a part of Jody's grim tale. The shadows stretched and twisted like the gnarled branches of the trees outside as the night deepened. I had hoped that the sunny morning would bring a sense of clarity, but the darkness unveiled a suffocating blanket of dread. Every creak in the old house seemed amplified, echoing my racing heart. I was alone with my thoughts, alone with the memories of what had transpired over the past few days. After the encounter with Officer Hartman, I had thought about calling the police again, but the idea left a metallic taste in my mouth. Hartman's warning played over and over in my mind, "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." The words haunted me like a ghost, twisting my thoughts in a web of paranoia. What was he hiding? Who was he really? The fog clung to the ground in a thick shroud, creeping through the backyard like a malevolent spirit. I pulled the curtain aside, trying to peer into the impenetrable darkness. There was a sound, a rustle, a movement just beyond the edge of the yard. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I saw, but it was nothing more than the wind playing tricks with the weeds. The phone rang, jolting me from my reverie. I snatched it from the table, my heart racing. It was a private number. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling. "Is this Megan?" The voice was deep and gravelly, an unsettling calm cutting through the tension. "You need to listen to me very carefully." "Who is this?" I asked, my throat dry. "They don't want you to find out the truth. You have to stay away from Hartman, and you must keep your door locked." "Why?" "What do you know?" I pressed, desperation clawing at my insides. But the line went dead, leaving only the hollow sound of silence. Bursting with fear, I glanced back out into the yard. The fog had thickened, swirling ominously, and I could have sworn I saw a figure standing among the trees, but when I blinked, it was gone. I slammed the phone down, shaking, and rushed to the door, bolting it shut. My mind raced with questions, each one darker than the last. The police were supposed to protect us, but I had learned that not all heroes wore uniforms. The very people meant to uphold the law could also be its most dangerous violators. I made my way to the living room, the flickering light of the lamp casting eerie shadows on the walls. I needed to think, to gather my thoughts. I picked up my laptop and opened the search engine, typing frantically. Officer Hartman misconduct, I muttered to myself, hoping for some scrap of information that would explain the mystery. As the page loaded, I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't just the cold in the room, it was the weight of dread settling in. The search yielded nothing significant, just a few articles about his commendations. Was he really as clean as he appeared? I closed the laptop, the screen darkened, matching the thoughts swirling in my mind. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the back door, making me jump. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached cautiously. I peered through the peephole but saw only darkness. I could hear my own breath, quickened and shallow, as I debated whether to call 911. The thud came again, more insistent this time, like a demand. "Please, just go away," I whispered to myself, feeling like a child hiding from monsters under the bed. The sound stopped, replaced by an unsettling stillness. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel it pressing against my skin. As I stood there, frozen, my phone vibrated violently on the table. I jumped, grabbing it. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "They're coming for you." My heart dropped, a fresh wave of fear crashing over me. Who were they? My hand shook as I typed back, demanding answers, but before I could hit send, the lights flickered and died. Darkness enveloped me, and I stumbled backward, my breaths coming in sharp gasps. I had a flashlight somewhere, but the thought of stumbling through the inky blackness sent terror spiraling through my veins. In that moment, I heard it again, soft footsteps coming from the back door, slow and deliberate. I didn't think, I just acted. I darted to the kitchen, grabbing the largest knife I could find. My hands were clammy, my grip unsteady, but I knew I had to protect myself. The footsteps grew louder. I could almost feel the weight of whoever was out there pressing against the door. "Is anyone home?" a voice called, smooth and almost mocking. It was a sound I recognized, a ghost from the past. "Officer Hartman." "Go away!" I shouted, my voice trembling but defiant. "I don't want to talk to you." Silence hung in the air, thick with tension, before he spoke again. "Let me in, Megan. This is about your safety." "Safety?" I scoffed, feeling anger rise in me. "You think I'd trust you after what you said? You're the one I'm afraid of." His voice took on a harder edge. "You don't know what's happening. You need to let me in before it's too late." A rush of fear gripped me, but I felt a strange urge to open the door. What if, somehow, he was telling the truth? Yet, my gut screamed at me to resist. I had seen too many horror films to know what happened when you let the darkness inside. With the knife clutched tight, I moved toward the door, my heart pounding like a war drum. I pressed my ear against the wood, my breath catching in my throat as I waited. The footsteps shuffled nervously outside, and a cold sweat broke on my skin. The world felt suspended, a moment of pure terror hanging in the air. And then, a sudden crash shattered the night, the back door splintering as it flew open, revealing the looming figure of Hartman, his face etched with seriousness. Behind him, the shadows seemed to pulse, as if they had a life of their own. I gripped the knife tighter, realizing that this was the moment everything changed. The choice between light and darkness lay before me, and I stood on the precipice, ready to plunge into the abyss. The town slept under a pall of fog, heavy and suffocating, as if the night itself conspired to hide its secrets. I stood outside the station, the familiar blue and red lights casting a ghostly glow over the cracked asphalt. The air was thick with anticipation, and I felt as if I were the only living thing in a world gone cold. After the night's events, I knew better than to believe in coincidence. The reports had come flooding in, each one more disturbing than the last. A string of disappearances, all linked to a single stretch of abandoned road just outside town. The police had dismissed them as runaways or drifters, but deep down, I felt something darker lurk beneath the surface. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Inside the station, the atmosphere was tense. Officers milled about, their faces drawn and pale. I overheard snippets of conversations that sent chills down my spine. They found another one officer muttered to another, his voice barely above a whisper. This time near the old Bellamy house. I shivered at the mention of the place. Stories of its haunted past had circulated for decades, legends of ghostly figures and unexplainable occurrences. I had laughed at the tales back when I was a kid, but now they clawed at the back of my mind. I approached the desk sergeant, a weary-looking man named Harris who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. I need to know more about the disappearances, I said, keeping my voice steady in spite of the fear coiling in my stomach. He regarded me with a mixture of pity and concern. You should stay away from this, Sarah. It's not safe, he warned, his tone grave. The last officer who got too involved, he trailed off, his eyes flicking to the floor as if the memory haunted him. What happened to him? I pressed, unable to quell the curiosity ignited in me. Harris shook his head, his gaze hardening. Just focus on your job, all right? Leave the rest to us. But I couldn't. Something gnawed at me, a primal instinct pushing me toward the truth. I decided to investigate the Bellamy house that evening, despite Harris's warning. The fog thickened around me as I drove, the headlights slicing through the gloom like a knife. I felt as if the darkness itself was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I parked at the foot of the driveway, the overgrown weeds clawing at my tires as I stepped into the night. The air had a strange metallic taste, a precursor to something terrible. I approached the house, its silhouette looming like a predator. The windows were boarded up, but I could see the remnants of a once grand home, now a shell, long forgotten. My heart raced as I moved closer, my flashlight trembling in my grip. As I crept toward the door, I heard it soft, almost imperceptible, like a whisper on the wind. I paused, straining to listen. It came again, clearer this time, an echo of laughter, chilling and hollow. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt an icy finger of dread slide down my spine. This wasn't right. The door creaked open at my touch, revealing a dark interior that smelled of decay. I hesitated, but the laughter beckoned me further inside, luring me with its eerie familiarity. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the shadows. Dust motes danced in the air, and I stepped across the threshold, feeling as if I'd crossed into another realm. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight as I moved deeper into the house. The laughter grew louder, echoing off the walls, wrapping around me like a vice. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I pressed on, driven by a mix of dread and determination. In what had once been the living room, I stumbled upon remnants of lives long past, a broken doll, its glassy eyes staring sightlessly at me, a faded photograph of a family who had long since vanished. I picked it up, my fingers brushing against the cracked frame, and I froze. The faces in the photo were eerily familiar. They matched the descriptions of the missing persons I had seen in the reports. Heart racing, I turned to leave, but the laughter morphed into something far more sinister, a cacophony of screams that echoed through the shattered walls. My pulse thundered in my ears as I ran for the door, the flashlight flickering in my trembling hand. I burst into the night, gasping for breath, but the fog clung to me like a shroud. As I reached my car, the laughter transformed into a deep, rumbling growl. I spun around, and there it was, dark shapes emerging from the fog, twisted forms that seemed to shift and melt into one another. I fumbled with my keys, desperation clawing at my throat. The creatures advanced, their eyes glinting like knives in the darkness, and a voice echoed in my mind, chilling and familiar. "Sarah, come play." The world narrowed to a single point of terror, and my instinct screamed for me to flee. I scrambled into my car, slamming the door shut just as a shadow thudded against the window. The engine roared to life, and I careened down the driveway, leaving the house and its horrors behind. But as I drove away, the laughter lingered, a haunting reminder that the darkness was not finished with me yet. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those monstrous shapes pursuing me, but all I found was the fog, pressing in like a curtain closing on the final act of a play. I gripped the steering wheel harder, knowing the real horror was just beginning. I had uncovered a truth woven with nightmares, and now I was entangled in a web from which there might be no escape. Story 3, Hooked by the Abyss. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting an eerie orange glow over Lake Morrow. It was a place I had visited countless times, a stretch of water cradled by dense woods, its depth unknown to even the most seasoned of locals. That evening, I had planned a simple fishing trip, a way to escape the weight of the week. My friends, Ben and Clara, had reluctantly agreed to join, but they were more interested in the idea of a campfire than the thrill of fishing. As we set up our gear by the rocky shore, a chill danced along my spine, but I brushed it off as the evening air settling in. I focused on my rod, baiting the hook with a wobbling worm that squirmed in my palm. Ben joked about the monster fish lurking in the depths, while Clara rolled her eyes, her laughter echoing against the serene backdrop. "You really believe in that story, don't you?" she teased, flicking her line into the water. I shot her a look, half serious. The townsfolk had spun tales of a creature that roamed the lake, something ancient and bitter. It was said to drag unsuspecting fishermen into the depths, leaving behind nothing but ripples. I had heard the whispers, but they were just that, whispers. We settled into our routine, the soft sounds of nature surrounding us, mingled with the occasional laughter from Clara. The sun dipped below the trees, and darkness began to creep across the water like a hungry shadow. I felt a tightening in my stomach, an instinctive sense that companionship would not be enough to ward off the growing unease. The first hour passed with only a few nibbles, and I had begun to lose hope when something tugged at my line with an unexpected force. My heart raced as I reeled it in, my hands trembling with excitement. The moment the fish broke the surface, my breath caught in my throat. It was unlike any freshwater fish I had ever seen, larger than the rest, with scales that shimmered beneath the waning light. "Whoa, look at that!" Ben exclaimed, his eyes wide with disbelief. I felt an odd connection to it, an almost otherworldly presence that sent prickles down my arms. As I held it up for Clara to see, I noticed its eyes sunken, dark, as if it had seen things beyond understanding. The way it thrashed in my grasp felt wrong, a desperate fight for freedom that made me reconsider letting it go. "Let it go, Sam," Clara urged, her voice laced with a sudden seriousness. "It's not right." The words hung in the air, felt heavier than the encroaching night. I hesitated, the fish's gaping mouth gasping for air, and against my better judgment, I released it back into the water. It swam away, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been more than just a fish. As darkness enveloped the lake, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. Clara huddled close to the campfire, her laughter faded into the whispers of the night. Ben, who had wandered off to explore, called out to us, his voice echoing unnaturally across the stillness. "Hey, you guys! Come check this out." I exchanged a glance with Clara, and despite my instinct to stay close to the fire, we both stood up, curiosity leading us toward his voice. The woods felt alive around us, branches scratching against one another like fingers in a dark room. We followed the sound of rustling leaves until we found Ben standing by the edge of the lake, staring at something just beneath the surface. "What is it?" Clara asked, her voice wavering slightly. "I don't know," he replied, squinting into the darkness. "It looks like something bobbing in the water." As I leaned closer, my heart sank. It was the unmistakable shape of a lifeless body, drenched and pale against the inky water. I forced myself to step back, my stomach churning. Clara gasped, her hand clamping over her mouth as she turned to me, shock written across her face. "Sam, we need to call someone," she said urgently. But as I fished out my phone, the screen flickered without ever getting a signal. The eerie sensation washed back over me, and I felt the oppressive weight of dread settling in. I glanced back at the water, an instinctual fear clawing at my insides. Then continued to stare, fascination mingling with horror. "What if it's the fish? The one you caught?" His words struck deeper than I wanted to admit. The deep shadows in the water stirred, and I felt as though unseen eyes were watching us from beneath the surface. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around my thoughts. We stumbled backward, an unspoken agreement forming between us. We needed to leave. But as we turned to head back to the shore, a sudden stillness enveloped us, the air thick and heavy. The laughter of the lake felt sinister, an echo of the tales I had disregarded. The water rippled, and I swore I saw something large and dark shift beneath the surface, a reminder that some things are better left undiscovered. In that moment, the reality of our location hit me with full force. The weight of the stories came crashing down, and I realized the lake had many secrets, ones that were perhaps best buried in its depths. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I glanced back at the water, my heart racing as I grappled with the growing fear that we were not alone. The sun sank slowly behind the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. I sat on the edge of the old wooden dock, my feet dangling over the water, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest like an unwelcome guest. The lake was still, its surface smooth as glass. Flickering insects danced above it, unaware of the darkness gathering just out of sight. I had always loved fishing, but this trip felt different. It was supposed to be a simple escape from the grind of life, a chance to reconnect with nature. Yet, as evening crept in, the atmosphere thickened with something sinister. I glanced down at my tackle box. It was my father's, worn and faded, but filled with memories. Each lure held a story, a moment from summers long gone, when we would laugh and fish until the stars blanketed the sky. Now, the echoes of those days felt haunted. The first time I had fished the lake alone, I had felt a thrill. The solitude was intoxicating, and the isolation offered a strange comfort. But that evening, I felt watched. When I scanned the tree line, shadows flickered, almost as if they were alive, writhing with intent. I shook my head, dismissing the feeling as mere paranoia. I cast my line into the water, the plop echoing loudly in the stillness. The moment stretched infinitely, my mind wandering back to last night's storm, thunder crashing, lightning illuminating the trees like a strobe light. I had caught a glimpse of something large swimming beneath the surface, a dark shape that had vanished just as quickly as it appeared. I had chalked it up to the storm's aftereffects, but now doubt gnawed at me. The water rippled, and my line tightened. I felt a sudden jolt of exhilaration, the promise of a catch breaking through the oppressive fog of dread. I yanked my rod, reeling in with excitement, but the resistance from the other end didn't feel right. It thrashed violently, not like a fish but something far more sinister. Panic washed over me as the invisible creature tugged harder, pulling my dreams of a peaceful fishing trip into the depths of the lake. I fought back, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I tried to haul it closer. A moment later, with a final, desperate heave, the line snapped. The rod jerked out of my hands, splashing into the water. Heart pounding, I stumbled back, my eyes wide as I stared into the stillness, waiting for the ripple to dissipate. But something didn't feel finished. An icy gust of wind swept across the lake, chilling me to the bone. Then I heard it, an unmistakable sound, the soft patter of something emerging from the water. I leaned closer, peering into the twilight depths, and that's when I saw it. A figure swimming just below the surface, its pale, elongated form gliding with an unnatural grace. It paused, its head breaking the surface, revealing hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the encroaching darkness. I stumbled backward, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt rooted to the dock. It watched me, unblinking, as though it reveled in my terror. I gasped, choking on the fear that clawed at my throat. The figure dipped below the water, leaving only ripples in its wake, yet I felt its presence lingering, a dark shadow that refused to fade. The air grew heavy, thick with an unnameable dread. I scrambled to the edge of the dock, peering into the abyss, praying I had imagined it. But there was no comfort to be found in the water's depths. I grabbed for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the dimness, shaking as I scanned the surface. The lake was deceptively calm. It held secrets I was not meant to uncover. Then, with a suddenness that made me flinch, a splash broke the tranquility. I whirled around, shining the light toward the sound, but the darkness around the dock swallowed it whole. My heart raced as I heard something, a low, guttural noise that sent chills racing down my spine. It was coming from the trees, somewhere close, right beyond the edge of the clearing. I gathered my tackle box, the weight of it a heavy reminder of my father's presence, and began to retreat back up the dock. The sound drew closer, and my feet clumsily pounded against the planks. I could feel the shadows creeping behind me, could sense the figure from the lake lurking just out of sight. I had to get away from the water, away from whatever had emerged from its depths. As I reached the shore, the air felt electric, a charge that prickled my skin. Without looking back, I sprinted toward the cabin, each step a desperate attempt to escape the grasp of whatever haunted this place. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing in the silence that followed. I leaned against it, breathless, my mind racing with thoughts that refused to settle. I reached for my phone, desperate to call for help, but it had no signal. I was isolated, trapped in a place where reality twisted into nightmares. I felt the chill seep into my bones as I peered through the window, the beam of my flashlight flickering across the tree line. I had come here for peace, but now I realized this lake held more than fish. It guarded secrets long buried, and I had just caught a glimpse of something I could never understand. Dawn broke over Lake Hollow with an eerie stillness, the mist clinging to the water like a shroud concealing forgotten secrets. I had stayed awake most of the night, the events of the previous day replaying in my mind, a chilling loop that I could not escape. I could still feel the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on me, the feeling of being watched lingering like a bad memory. The absence of sound was deafening, even the birds seemed to sense something was wrong. I knew I couldn't put off the fishing trip any longer. The promise of a record catch had lured my father and me to this desolate spot, but now it felt more like a trap. I wrapped my jacket tighter around myself, shivering as a cold breeze swept through the trees. My heart raced as I grabbed my gear, the fishing rod feeling heavier than before. It wasn't just the weight of the equipment, it was the dread I carried with me. I stepped onto the small wooden dock, the boards creaking under my weight. The boat bobbed gently in the water, and I hesitated for a moment. It was just a fishing trip, I told myself, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me. But as I pushed the boat away from the dock and into the lake, I felt a sudden surge of dread wash over me. I could swear the water was watching me, a dark, murky consciousness lurking beneath the surface. I started my engine, the boat vibrating beneath me as I steered towards the center of the lake. The sky was a washed-out blue, and I began to focus on the rhythmic sound of my heartbeat, the gentle hum of the engine, and the lapping of the waves against the sides of the boat. My resolve strengthened as I tossed out my line, trying to drown out the whispers of anxiety that crept into my mind. As the sun climbed higher, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. I was alone here, the farthest from civilization I could be, and part of me was grateful. It was serene. Gradually, I lost track of time, focusing solely on the water and the hopes of a big catch. But then, an unsettling sound pulled me from my reverie, a low thrum emanating from deep beneath the lake. I paused, straining to listen. The noise grew louder, a throbbing pulse that seemed to synchronize with my own heartbeat. The surface of the water began to ripple unnaturally. It looked like something was moving beneath the surface. I sat frozen, the fishing pole slipping from my fingers and splashing into the water. Fear gripped me like a vice. What could be down there? I remembered the locals' warnings about Lake Hollow, the stories of fishermen who had disappeared without a trace, tales that had seemed so absurd when my father had told them. The thrumming sound morphed into a low growl, and I felt the boat rock violently. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to regain control, my thoughts racing. The water darkened around me, swirling in shades of deep blue and black. I leaned over the side of the boat, peering into the depths, but there was nothing to see. Only darkness stared back, swallowing the light. And then very suddenly, the water erupted. It happened in a frenzy, the surface exploding as a massive creature broke free from below. I could hardly process what I was seeing. A monstrous fish, or some grotesque hybrid of fish and something else, glimmered in the sunlight. It was easily the size of my boat, its scales glistening like shards of glass. The creature opened its jaws, revealing rows of teeth that looked more at home in a nightmare than a lake. It lunged toward me, and I barely jumped back in time as the boat shuddered under the impact. I was thrown off balance and scrambled to regain my footing. Adrenaline surged through my body as I turned to start the engine, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the ignition. The creature circled the boat, its massive body creating waves that threatened to capsize me. I was anchored not just by the weight of my fear, but by the sheer otherworldly presence of this beast. I could see its eyes now, cold, calculating, and filled with an unfathomable darkness. It was as if it recognized me, as if it sought not just to feed, but to instill terror. I had to escape. I finally managed to start the engine, the roar filling the air, and I pushed the throttle forward. The boat surged ahead, but the creature was faster, its massive tail slapping the water with a force that sent spray flying. I looked back and saw it leaping, a dark silhouette against the sky, before crashing down into the water mere feet from the boat. Fear gripped me. I knew that if I fell overboard, there would be no chance of rescue. It was just me and this monster, a twisted game I hadn't signed up for. I felt the boat tilt, the engine sputtering as I fought to keep my balance. Just as I thought I might escape, the creature breached again, this time directly in front of me, blocking my path. It opened its maw wide, and instead of sharp teeth and instinctual hunger, I saw something else, something almost human in its gaze, a knowing intelligence that sent chills coursing down my spine. As I swerved to avoid it, I could feel the boat teeter dangerously. The world around me blurred into chaos, water splashed everywhere, and I could scarcely breathe. I needed to focus. I needed to outsmart this beast. I steered towards the shoreline, hoping to reach the safety of land before it struck again. But the creature roared, a sound that pierced my soul and echoed over the water, drowning out every rational thought. I didn't glance back. I pushed the throttle to its limit, praying it would be enough to escape this nightmare. And in that moment, I realized that Lake Hollow was not just a fishing spot. It was a graveyard of lost souls, a place where the line between the living and the unknown had been blurred for far too long. I could feel its presence bearing down on me, its intentions clear. If I didn't escape, I would become just another ghost to haunt the waters of this cursed lake. The weight of the previous night hung over me like a shroud, wrapping me in a chill that refused to dissipate. I had barely slept, haunted by the echoes of whispers and the scratching sound that had clawed at the edges of my dreams. I could still feel the boat sway, the creaking wood whispering secrets that no one should hear. As dawn broke, a gray light seeped through the curtains of my small cabin, illuminating the knots in the wood and the peeling paint that had seen better days. I forced myself to rise, shaking off the remnants of dread. The lake lay just outside my window, a glassy expanse that mirrored the bleak sky. Memories of Craig's frantic face filled my mind, the way he had urged me not to fish in the deeper waters, the way his eyes had darted toward the shore as if expecting something to emerge from the depths. I pushed those thoughts down. I had come here to escape, not to dwell on the unknown. I made my way outside, the crisp air biting at my skin. The lake was eerily calm, not a single ripple distorting its surface. It didn't look like the place where nightmares were born, but I knew better now. I grabbed my gear, heart racing with an excitement that mingled with anxiety. The morning was ripe for fishing, the stillness a promise of tranquility, but I could not shake the feeling that something lurked just below the surface. I launched the small boat, the motor sputtering to life as I ventured out onto the water, the hum vibrating through the hull. I headed toward the deeper spots, ignoring the gnawing instinct that urged me to steer clear. The sun struggled to break through the clouds, casting an eerie pallor over everything, but I felt a thrill as I dropped the anchor and cast my line. Minutes turned into hours as I waited, the quiet stretching on like an eternal pause in a song. I could hear the faint call of a loon in the distance, and for a moment, I imagined the world beyond the lake, the chaos of my life melting away. But then the stillness choked me, and I scanned the water, looking for any sign of movement. Was that a shadow under the surface? A trick of the light? I blinked, reassured myself, and refocused on my line. Time slipped away, and just when I thought I might reel in an empty day, something yanked hard at my rod. My heart leapt as I struggled to set the hook, adrenaline coursing through me. It was a fight, one that pulled and tugged with a ferocity that sent a thrill through me. I braced myself, muscles straining as I pulled back, the fish thrashing violently beneath the water. But there was something different about this struggle. It felt wrong, as if I were not merely wrestling with a fish, but with something twisted and malevolent. Panic bubbled up inside me. I was too far from the shore, too far from help if something went wrong. Sweat dripped down my temple as I reeled with all my strength, the line slicing through the water until finally, I saw it break the surface. The creature that emerged was not what I expected. It was a massive fish, yes, but twisted and grotesque, its eyes bulging, and its scales a sickly hue. It flopped and writhed, gasping for air, and for an instant, our eyes locked. I felt a jolt of recognition, a sense of dread creeping up my spine like icy fingers. It was as if it were staring into my soul, a reflection of the darkness that had haunted me since my arrival. I hesitated, my grip slackening on the rod. The creature managed to inhale a breath of air, and to my horror, a voice echoed in my mind. It was a whisper, soft but insistent, begging for release, begging for salvation. The words coiled around my thoughts, wrapping them in a suffocating grip. "Help me," it begged, the voice a haunting melody of despair. "Release me." I stumbled backward in my seat, the boat rocking beneath me. Desperation clawed at my throat, and for a moment, I considered cutting the line, freeing it back to the depths. But something held me back. A sick curiosity, a morbid fascination with what lay beneath the surface, rooted me to the spot. The creature's body twisted, exposing jagged teeth and a gaping mouth that seemed to promise both horror and allure. "You must help me," it repeated, its voice echoing like a chant, pulling at my sanity. "You do not know what lurks in the deep. Set me free." I felt the weight of its words, a darkness pressing against my chest like a heavy stone. The whispers of the night returned, and I could sense the others, the unwelcomed, the lost ones that had come before me. I thought of Craig's warnings, the way he had watched the water, looking for signs of danger. Had he seen this thing? Had he heard its pleas? The creature thrashed violently once more, snapping me out of my trance. I had to decide. In that moment, I couldn't tell if my fear was of the creature or of the truth it carried. I gripped my rod tighter, the line taut against the weight of the mass beneath. The choice burned in my chest, and all I could think about was the pull of the water, the way it beckoned to me with invisible hands. With one swift motion, I cut the line. The creature let out a shriek that echoed across the stillness of the lake, a sound of betrayal and fury. It splashed back into the depths, the surface closing over it like a secret sealed away. I sat there, breathless, trembling. Its voice faded, but the dread remained, a shadow in the back of my mind. I had set it free, but what had I unleashed? The calm surface of the lake mocked me as I turned the boat back toward the shore, my heart pounding and my thoughts spinning. I was no longer just a fisher. I was a part of something far more sinister, and I could feel the water watching. It would not forget. It could not forget. The boat swayed beneath my feet, the gentle lapping of water against the hull a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, a subtle dissonance that prickled at the edges of my consciousness. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the surface of the lake, but the beauty of the scene felt more like a taunt than a comfort. 3 days had passed since we had first set out, and the thrill of fishing had faded into something else and something darker. My friends, Mark and Lisa, laughed and joked around me, oblivious to the shifting air that seemed to settle heavily on my shoulders. Yesterday had been a turning point, our catch had dwindled, and the eerie encounters with the locals had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I could still hear the raspy voice of the old fisherman as he warned us about the lake, his words echoing in my ears like a haunting refrain. "Don't go out too far, and don't fish at night," he had said. "The lake doesn't give up its secrets easily." Mark had brushed off the warning, as he always did, claiming it was just local folklore. But as the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the water, I found myself looking over the edge of the boat, scanning the depths for signs of movement. I wouldn't admit it, but I felt a pull and urge to drop my line into the deeper parts, where the water turned dark and cold. It was as if something beneath was calling out to me, whispering secrets I was both curious and terrified to uncover. Lisa was the first to break the silence, her voice bright and cheerful as she baited her hook. "I think I'm going to catch the biggest fish yet," she declared, laughing. I forced a smile in response, but my heart wasn't in it. I could feel the weight of the water pressing around us, the darkness creeping in at the edges. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the world turned muted shades of gray. "We should head back soon," I suggested, my voice sounding hollow in the stillness. Mark rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on. We haven't even caught anything good yet. Just one more hour." Reluctantly, I agreed, though the anticipation of being out there longer set my nerves on edge. I kept glancing at the tree-lined banks, shadows lengthening like fingers reaching toward us, and the chill in the air told me that night wasn't far off. The first hour passed slowly, silence wrapping around us like a heavy blanket. Lisa hummed a tune softly, and Mark fiddled with his gear, but I felt like a ghost hanging on the fringes of their laughter. It was the sound of something breaking the surface that shattered the calm. A loud splash erupted from the water, sending ripples racing outward. I jumped, heart racing, and turned to see Mark peering at the spot where the disturbance had occurred. "What the hell was that?" he asked, squinting into the twilight. I didn't answer, my gaze fixed on the dark water as it settled again. The surface was deceptively smooth, yet my gut churned. There was no mistaking the urgency in the way those ripples spread. "Maybe it's just a fish," Lisa shrugged, though I could see the uncertainty flicker in her eyes. But it didn't feel like just a fish. I felt it in my bones. As the sun finally disappeared, surrendering the sky to an inky blackness, the air grew even colder. The ambience shifted, and I could almost hear the whispers in the wind, a low murmur that seemed to echo from the depths of the lake itself. "Let's try the deeper part," Mark suggested, breaking through my swirling thoughts. I hesitated, the unease creeping back like an unwelcome visitor. "Maybe we should just head back," I said, but Mark was already steering the boat into the dark waters. My heart began to race as the boat angled away from the shore. The lights of our cabin faded, swallowed by the surrounding darkness. The faintest glow of twilight succumbed to night, and the stars prickled the skies above, cold and indifferent. With each passing moment, the tension mounted. Mark tossed his line into the depths, and I followed suit, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I stared into the darkness, half expecting a pair of eyes to surface and meet my gaze. The water was a mirror, reflecting the stars above, but it was also a veil over the unfathomable secrets below. Lisa broke the silence again, her voice shaky. Maybe we should just fish from the shallows. I don't like it out here. Before I could respond, a sudden jerk jolted my fishing pole, pulling me from my anxious reverie. I grabbed the rod, adrenaline surging through my veins, and as I tugged hard, something heavy thrashed in the water. Got something. I shouted, excitement breaking through my dread. As I reeled it in, the surface roiled, and I felt an overwhelming rush of energy, but as the fish breached the surface, my heart sank. What emerged was far from ordinary. It was grotesque, its scales reflecting the moonlight in sickly hues of gray and green. It flopped in the boat, gasping for air, its mouth twisted in a silent scream. What is that?" Mark stuttered, staring at the creature in horror. I couldn't answer. My mind raced, and the whispers returned, louder this time, echoing with a terrible finality. The air crackled with something ancient and angry. As if sensing the tension, the creature stopped moving, its eyes locking onto mine with an intelligence that was impossibly human. I stumbled back, panic setting in. The boat rocked violently, and I heard Lisa scream. Something pulled at the edges of my sanity, a realization that I was not alone. The water below churned, and shadows stirred. I could sense it, a dark force rising, an entity that had waited patiently for us to trespass. As I glanced into the depths, a realization washed over me. Those whispers were not just the wind, they were voices, calling for retribution. The boat began to tip dangerously, and as the shadows surged up, I felt the icy grip of fear wrap around my heart. We had ventured too far into the darkness, and now the lake demanded its price. Story 4, Voices from the Forgotten Asylum. It started on a damp Wednesday evening in March, the kind of night when the wind howled through the trees like a restless ghost. I had taken a detour that I had never intended to take, drawn off my usual path by an otherworldly pull that felt almost magnetic. The setting sun had left behind a smudge of purple and orange, but the encroaching darkness wrapped itself around me like a shroud. I knew I shouldn't be in this part of town, but the allure of the old Edwards house was too tempting. The Edwards house stood at the end of a narrow lane, half hidden behind a thicket of twisted trees. It was a relic of the past, its once white paint now peeling and dulled to a ghostly gray. The locals said it was haunted, that the spirits of the Edwards family hadn't moved on after their tragic demise in the late 1800s. A fire, they whispered, though no one could tell me how it started or why. Curiosity gnawed at me, a hunger I couldn't ignore. As I made my way up the cracked steps, I felt an unusual chill in the air. It wasn't just the temperature, it was as if the very atmosphere had thickened, pressing down around me. I hesitated at the threshold, heart pounding against my ribs. The front door was ajar, swaying gently as if beckoning me inside. With a deep breath, I stepped forward, crossing the threshold into a world that had been frozen in time. The musty scent of decay hit me immediately, wrapping itself around my senses like a damp blanket. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through broken windows, while shadows pulled in the corners, darker than the surrounding gloom. I felt an unnatural heaviness in my chest, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. As I wandered through the dimly lit rooms, I absorbed every detail, the faded floral wallpaper, the furniture draped in white sheets like ghosts of their former selves. I half expected to see a figure emerge from the shadows, but the house remained eerily still. Each creak of the floorboards echoed in the silence, a reminder of my solitude. At the end of a narrow hallway, I found a staircase spiraling upwards, its banister splintered and worn. A flicker of uncertainty washed over me, but the pull I felt was irresistible. I climbed the stairs, each step a calculated risk, my mind racing with thoughts of what I might find. The second floor was darker still, the windows boarded up and the air thick with the scent of mildew. I knew this was where the family had spent their last days, where their lives had been cut short in flames. I had come here seeking answers, perhaps even a thrill, but now I felt as if I were intruding on something sacred. In one of the rooms, I noticed the remnants of a child's bedroom. A small bed lay against the wall, covered in a thick layer of dust. On the floor, I spotted a tattered teddy bear, its stitched eyes gazing up at me with a longing that sent a shiver down my spine. I picked it up instinctively, the fabric worn and soft to the touch. It was then that I heard it, a soft whisper, almost too faint to catch, but distinct enough to send chills down my spine. I dropped the bear as if it had burned my hands, my breath quickening. I strained to listen, the whisper growing louder, echoing through the walls like a mournful lullaby. "Help us," it seemed to say, the plea imbued with an anguish that made my stomach churn. I wanted to turn back, to flee from this wretched house, but my feet remained rooted to the floor. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, and I jolted, adrenaline coursing through my veins. My instinct screamed for me to run, but a part of me was frozen in place, compelled to stay. I took a tentative step toward the door when I heard it again, an unmistakable voice, clearer this time, a child's voice calling my name. Emily. I had never been here before, yet my name slipped through the air like a thread connecting me to this forlorn place. Panic surged within me, battling against a strange sense of familiarity. I stumbled out of the bedroom, heart racing, driven by the urgent need to escape but tethered by an invisible force that urged me onward. I rushed down the hall, my pulse thrumming in my ears, and skidded to a halt at the top of the staircase. Below me, a shadow moved, flitting through the darkness. I squinted, searching for the source, but the figure was gone in an instant. The air felt charged, electric, and I was acutely aware of the weight of the silence pressing against me. I took a deep breath and descended the stairs, each step deliberate, every creak sounding like a thunderclap in the stillness. As I reached the bottom, I was met with an oppressive darkness that swallowed the light, and for a moment, I felt as if I were suspended in time, caught between the living and the dead. "Emily." The voice came again, softer now, like a whisper on the wind. I turned toward it, compelled by a force I couldn't resist, and stepped into the entryway. The house seemed to pulse around me, alive with secrets it longed to share. The walls closed in, and I felt a sense of urgency pushing me forward, deep into that haunted place where history and sorrow converged. I could feel them watching, waiting just beyond the veil of shadows. I had come seeking answers, but what awaited me in the heart of the Edwards house was something far more chilling and unexplainable than I had ever anticipated. The next morning, I awoke with the remnants of last night's terror clinging to me like a thick fog. My heart still raced as I replayed the dreams that had invaded my sleep, dreams that blurred the lines between reality and something far darker. I could almost hear the whispers again, that sinister chorus echoing through my mind, urging me to remember something I could not grasp. The dawn light filtered through my bedroom window, a pale orange hue casting shadows across the walls. I sat up, rubbing my temples, hoping the sunlight would chase away the remnants of dread lurking in the corners of my consciousness. I turned to the side table, my eyes landing on the journal I had begun shortly after moving into this house. Its pages were filled with my thoughts, sketches of strange occurrences, and unsettling dreams, but I had not opened it since last night. A shiver traveled down my spine as I reached for it. I flipped through the pages, the sound of rustling paper only amplifying the silence around me. I had chronicled every odd sound, every unexplained chill, but last night was different. I paused on a page with a crude drawing I had made, a rough sketch of the attic. I remembered Brian's warning, the way his voice trembled as he spoke of the space above, a place filled with remnants of the past but also shadowed by uncertainty. The attic was a place I had avoided, but a nagging curiosity pulled at me, urging me to confront my fears. I made my decision. I would go up there today. Perhaps confronting whatever lingered in that dark space would help me understand what I was experiencing. After breakfast, I stood at the foot of the attic stairs, the wooden steps creaking ominously as I ascended. Each step felt like a deliberate test of my resolve, the air growing colder with each breath I took. As I reached the small landing at the top, the door loomed before me, a heavy, weathered thing that seemed to breathe as I approached. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. In that moment, I felt a wave of dread wash over me, but I dismissed it as mere nerves. I twisted the knob and pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, echoing through the stillness of the attic. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through a small window, illuminating boxes piled haphazardly in every corner. The air inside was stale, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. I took a cautious step forward, my foot landing on a floorboard that groaned under my weight. I scanned the room, taking in the forgotten remnants of lives once lived. Old furniture covered with sheets seemed to lurk in the shadows, remnants of a past that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. I moved deeper into the attic, my heart pounding louder with each step. I reached a large trunk that sat at the back of the room, its surface weathered and scratched. Cautiously, I knelt beside it and pried the lid open. Inside, I found a collection of yellowed letters and faded photographs. The faces in the photographs stared back at me, their expressions frozen in time, their eyes following me as if they knew something I didn't. I picked up a letter and began to read. The ornate script told a story of loss, of a family torn apart by grief. The last few lines chilled me. The writer seemed to anticipate their own demise, a chilling premonition that left me breathless. As I tucked the letter back into the trunk, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, the chill wrapping around me like an icy hand. A noise broke the silence, soft, barely noticeable, like a whisper threading through the air. I froze, straining to listen. It was a voice, low and indistinct, rising from somewhere deep within the attic. It beckoned me, a siren song that compelled me toward the farthest corner of the room. Instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't move. I felt anchored to the spot, my feet glued to the floor as the voice grew louder. "Help me," it murmured, a fragile plea that resonated within my chest. I couldn't tell if it was a figment of my imagination or something more sinister, but the desperation in that voice pierced through my fear. With a surge of resolve, I turned and moved toward the source of the sound, guided by an unseen force. As I stepped deeper into the shadows, I saw it, a small, dusty mirror leaning against a wall, its surface dull and tarnished. The whispers swirled around it, growing more insistent, "Help me." My reflection appeared ghostly and pale as I approached, the shadows behind me stretching unnaturally. I felt drawn to it, the surface of the mirror rippling as if it were water. Slowly lifting my hand, I brushed my fingers against the glass. The moment I made contact, a jolt surged through me, a wave of icy terror that seized my heart. Visions flashed before my eyes, faces twisted in agony, dark figures looming in the corners, the same familiar whispers echoing throughout. I staggered back, the mirror cracking as I fell to the floor, gasping for breath. The room spun around me, reality bending in a way I couldn't comprehend. I finally scrambled to my feet, panic clawing at my throat. I had to get out. I turned, racing toward the attic door, but the atmosphere shifted, an invisible weight pressed down on me, slowing my movements as if the very air conspired to hold me in place. "Help me," the voice cried again, echoing in my mind, dragging me back. The attic felt alive, the shadows stretching like fingers, reaching for me as I fought to escape. Just as I reached the door, a gust of frigid wind slammed it shut, trapping me inside. Driven by sheer adrenaline, I banged on the door, my heart thundering in my chest. The whispers crescendoed, a cacophony of anguish and despair. I pressed my ear against the door, listening, desperately searching for a way out of this waking nightmare. And then, for a brief moment, the whispers receded, replaced by a single voice, clear and terrifying. "Stay with us." The words sent a chill down my spine, and I knew then that I was now alone, not in this attic, not in this house. I awoke the next morning to the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. The sunlight pierced through the curtains like a knife, illuminating the room and revealing how much of a mess I had made the night before. Disheveled sheets, half-empty glass of water, and the remnants of a restless mind were strewn across my small bedroom. I sat up slowly, the events of the night before swirling in my memory like autumn leaves caught in a gust of wind. It all felt surreal, almost like a dream, yet the unease was tangible. I thought about the figure I had seen in the darkness, that fleeting glimpse of a shape that had stolen my breath. My hands trembled as I recalled the coldness in the air that had wrapped around me, chasing away the warmth of my blanket. There had been something in the house, something that didn't belong, and I needed to know what it was. I pushed myself out of bed, determined to confront the shadows that had invaded my home. The house creaked as I moved through the hallway, the familiar sounds now seeming foreign and threatening. I paused outside the door to the attic, the only door I hadn't dared to open since settling in. A cold draft slipped down the staircase, and I swore I felt a whisper of breath across my neck. I shook my head, dismissing it as paranoia, and reached for the handle. To my surprise, it turned easily, and I hesitated, a knot tightening in my stomach. The attic had always been a place of forgotten things. I had avoided it, preferring to let dust settle over the past rather than confront it. Climbing the rickety stairs, each step groaned under my weight, echoing the mounting dread within me. I pushed the door open, wincing as it creaked loudly, transforming my quiet sanctuary into a realm of echoes. Darkness enveloped me as I stepped inside, the faint sunlight barely reaching the far corners of the room. Old trunks and boxes jutted out like gravestones, relics of lives lived long before mine. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the oppressive atmosphere. The air was stale, thick with a sense of abandonment, but there was something else, something electric, as if the very space held its breath. As I sifted through the contents of one of the boxes, my hand brushed against a tattered photograph. I pulled it out, revealing a faded image of a family standing outside the house, my house, decades ago. Their smiles were wide, but it was their eyes that gave me pause. They held a depth of sorrow that seemed to seep from the paper into my skin. I flipped the photograph over and saw a date scrawled in the corner, 1937. A shudder coursed through me. I had been living in the remnants of their lives, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still here, lingering in the shadows. The air became colder, and I could feel a presence behind me, watching, waiting. I turned, heart racing, but the attic was empty save for dust and cobwebs. Then I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible yet distinct. It came from the far corner of the attic. My instinct screamed for me to leave, but something deeper compelled me to investigate. I stepped cautiously toward the sound, my breath shallow, the photograph clutched tightly in my hand. The whisper grew louder, forming words I couldn't quite make out. As I neared the corner, I flicked on the small flashlight I had brought with me. The beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating the clutter that had been piled haphazardly. My heart sank as I spotted a small, ornate mirror half hidden behind a stack of old newspapers. It looked out of place, its surface gleaming like a beacon in the gloom. Compelled, I reached for it, the cool metal sending a shiver through my fingers. As I lifted it into the light, I saw my reflection, but it was distorted, twisted. Behind me, the attic seemed to ripple, shadows warping and shifting in a way that made my stomach churn. I stepped back, but the mirror seemed to pull me in, drawing my gaze like a moth to flame. The whisper crescendoed, now a chorus of voices, pleading, warning. I dropped the mirror, and it shattered on the wooden floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The whispers ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on me. Panic surged, and I turned, rushing toward the stairway. But as I neared the door, it slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. I stumbled backward, fear paralyzing me. "Let me out!" I screamed, beating on the door, but the wood felt solid, unyielding. The darkness seemed to close in around me, thick and suffocating. I could hear the air moving, the whispers returning, curling around me like smoke. Desperation clawed at my throat. Suddenly, the wooden planks beneath me creaked loudly, and I froze. Whatever was in the attic with me wasn't merely a figment of my imagination. I could feel it, pressing against my mind, urging me to remember. The weight of history bore down on me, and another memory flickered to life, an image of the family from the photograph, their faces twisted in despair. Then I saw it, a shadow darting across the room, too quick to be real. My heart raced as I turned, but there was nothing there. Just darkness and the remnants of shattered glass. I scrambled for the door, throwing my weight against it, but it wouldn't budge. I could hear the whispers again, louder now, a cacophony of voices, each one vying for my attention. "Help us," they echoed, a plea that resonated deep within me. The air shimmered, and in that moment, I understood. The souls of those who had lived here were trapped, bound to the place where they had known joy and sorrow alike. They were reaching out to me, desperate to be freed. I felt tears streaming down my face as I pressed my forehead against the door, merging my despair with theirs. "Please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I want to help you." As if my words had broken a spell, the door suddenly swung open, and I tumbled forward, landing on the attic floor. The whispers faded to a soft hum, and the temperature gradually returned to normal. I lay there for a moment, gasping, the remnants of fear still coursing through me. I stood up slowly, gripping the banister for support. I didn't know how I would help them or what it would require of me, but I felt a resolve begin to form, a bond connecting me to those who had come before. The weight of their sorrow rested heavily upon my shoulders, and I realized that my journey was only just beginning. The crack in the ceiling continued to widen, a jagged scar against the peeling paint. It felt alive, pulsating with an energy that sent chills down my spine. I had come to dread this room, but its presence was inescapable. I had tried to avoid it, but every corner of the old house seemed to draw me back, whispering secrets I wasn't prepared to hear. That night, the air felt different, thicker somehow, as if the very atmosphere was charged with electricity. I sat on the edge of my bed, the mattress sagging under my weight, barely illuminated by the flickering light of a single lamp. Shadows danced against the walls, elongating and contracting as the bulb struggled to hold its glow. I had taken to sleeping with the light on, deprived of the comforting darkness that had once cocooned me. I could still hear the arguments echoing from my parents last night together, the jagged remnants of their words slicing through the stillness of memory. I had tried to block them out, but they lingered, hanging over me like a threatening storm cloud. My father had stormed out, the door slamming behind him, and my mother's sobs had cracked through the walls of my room. That was years ago, yet I felt the weight of that night pressing down on me still. After the loud arguments, I began to notice small things that had changed about the house. Portraits that seemed to shift positions when I wasn't looking, the sound of laughter that echoed through the hall when I knew I was alone, and the sensation of being watched. Yet, nothing prepared me for the incident that occurred that night. Something tugged at my consciousness, pulling me toward the door. The hallway was dark, save for the sliver of light spilling from beneath my door. It felt warmer here, almost inviting, but an instinctive fear made me hesitate. I had seen enough horror movies to know that the dark held secrets best left undisturbed. But curiosity, that insatiable beast, propelled me forward. I stepped cautiously, the floorboards creaking beneath me as they always had, but this time the sound was different. There was a whisper that accompanied each step, low and almost melodic. I paused, straining to catch the words, but they danced out of reach, floating away like smoke. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door to the hallway. The shadows loomed larger, twisting in ways that suggested movement. I moved toward my parents' room, drawn by a magnetic pull that I couldn't explain. As I reached for the doorknob, something cold brushed against my arm like a breath or a gust of wind, but there was no breeze. I shuddered, my skin prickling, glancing over my shoulder. Nothing. Just the empty darkness. The door creaked open, the hinges protesting as I stepped inside. The room was unchanged, bed unmade, clothes strewn about, and the lingering scent of my mother's perfume hanging heavy in the air. But something felt off, a dissonance that tugged at my senses. The light flickered above, sending shadows darting across the walls, and then I saw it, the mirror above the dresser. In that moment, I caught a glimpse of something behind me in the reflection, a dark figure, tall and indistinct. Panic gripped my heart, and I spun around, eyes wild. My breath caught in my throat as I faced nothing but empty space. The air felt denser now, as if the shadows were alive, closing in on me, wrapping around me like a shroud. The mirror shimmered, and I turned back to it again. There was no figure now, but the reflection of my own face was distorted, twisted in a way that sent a jolt of fear through me. My eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and my mouth was open as if I were screaming, though I heard nothing. The silence was oppressive, a heavy blanket stifling any sound. I stumbled backward, the back of my legs hitting the bed, and I fell onto the mattress with a thud. My heart raced, and I fought the urge to scream. The feeling of being watched intensified, the shadows pooling in the corners like dark water, threatening to spill over and consume me. Just as I collected my thoughts enough to rise, a cold draft swept through the room, flickering the light once more. I could feel the temperature drop, a biting chill that seeped into my bones. My breath turned into visible puffs in the air. I slid my hand beneath the pillow, feeling the reassuring weight of my father's old pocket knife, but it felt inadequate against the rising tide of terror. Then I heard it, a soft giggle echoing through the room. It was innocent and childlike, yet utterly out of place. The sound came from the corner where the shadows pooled, and a figure emerged, a small girl with tangled hair and wide, hollow eyes. She wore a dress that looked like it had been sewn from shadows, flickering at the edges. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing like a distant bell, a haunting lullaby that sent shivers down my spine. I wanted to run, to leave this cursed house and the ghosts of the past behind, but I was paralyzed. The fear rooted me to the spot, the weight of the girl's gaze pinning me down. The room felt alive, a living entity that pulsed around us, closing in as if it were watching the spectacle unfold. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. The girl's eyes widened, pleading, and I felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, to touch her shoulder and pull her back into the light. Just as I extended my hand, she faded, dissolving into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the echo of her giggle still ringing in my ears. The room fell silent. I collapsed onto the bed, gasping for air, heart racing. The shadows lingered, but I sensed their retreat, as if they had found something more interesting to ensnare. I remained there, trembling and disoriented, wondering what had been unleashed. I understood then that I was now alone, and the walls of this house were far more than mere plaster and wood. They held secrets, dark and twisted, ready to unravel at the slightest touch. I had awakened something, and it was only a matter of time before it came for me again. It was a week after the incident with the mirror, the night I had seen my reflection smile back at me, something that felt both intimate and monstrous. I had tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my overactive imagination, but the unease settled in the corners of my mind like dust in an abandoned room. Each night, sleep eluded me as shadows danced across the walls, whispering secrets I could not hear. The days grew colder as October wrapped its skeletal fingers around my town. The trees outside my window, once proud and vibrant, now stood bare and twisted against the gray sky. I felt the urge to escape, to run far away from the weight of my home, but there was nowhere to go. The walls felt alive, watching, waiting. I could almost hear them breathing. That evening, I decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would cleanse the fog that had settled in my mind. As I stepped outside, the air was sharp, nipping at my skin like 1,000 tiny teeth. I wrapped my arms around myself, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of resolve. I would confront this darkness that had crept into my life. I wandered through the neighborhood, where the houses loomed like sentinels, their windows dark and blank. It was eerie, how quiet everything was, as if the world had been muted. I tried to focus on the crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant sound of children laughing, anything to ground me. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the mirror. As I strolled past the old McKinley place, its weather-worn shutters hanging askew, I felt an inexplicable pull. The stories surrounding the house were well known. They spoke of strange occurrences, lights flickering at odd hours, whispers drifting through the cracks in the walls, and the mysterious disappearance of its last occupant. It had stood empty for years, a monument to the town's fears. As I approached, an unsettling chill wrapped around me, and I hesitated. I remembered the local legend that anyone who dared to enter the McKinley house would be met by the spirits of those who had once lived there. But the thought of the voices, the possibility of answers, sent a surge of adrenaline through my veins. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in a rhythm that matched my foreboding anticipation. The front door creaked open at my touch, and I was met with a musty smell. It clung to the air like the memories trapped within those walls. I paused on the threshold, the darkness inside beckoning me. Holding my breath, I stepped inside, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down upon me. The living room was dim, illuminated only by the last remnants of twilight filtering through grimy windows. The furniture lay covered in white sheets, ghostly remnants of a life that had once thrived here. I moved cautiously, each step echoing in the silence, as if the house itself held its breath. I half expected to hear whispers, laughter, the sound of children playing, but there was only stillness. I climbed the staircase, the wood groaning beneath my weight. It felt like a journey into a forgotten world. The air thickened as I reached the second floor, where the door to the master bedroom stood ajar, as if inviting me in. I felt drawn to it, my pulse quickening with every step. Inside, the chamber was darker, a veil of shadow obscuring the corners. The once opulent decor had faded, the wallpaper peeling like dry skin. But it was the mirror that caught my attention, its surface still gleaming despite the years of neglect. It stood tall, framed in ornate carvings, reflecting a fragmented version of the room. I approached it slowly, my heart thumping in my chest as I reached out to touch the glass. The moment my fingers brushed against it, a wave of cold washed over me, and in that instant, the air shifted. I saw the reflection again, not just mine, but other figures swirling in the background, faces twisted in pain and sorrow. I gasped, stumbling back, but the mirror held me captive. Images flickered, and I could make out a woman dressed in white, her eyes hollow and pleading. She reached towards me, her mouth moving as if she were trying to scream. I felt my breath hitch, a sense of urgency swelling within me. I leaned closer, my heart racing as her face morphed into a grotesque smile. Then I heard it, a voice, low and mournful. It echoed in my mind, wrapping around me like a shroud. "Help us, break the cycle." Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward until I collided with the wall. The mirror rippled, and I saw myself, eyes white with terror, but the reflection was no longer mine. It morphed into the woman, her mouth stretching into that horrific grin. I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut, trapping me in the room. "Help us." The voice grew stronger, a chorus of tortured souls joining her. I banged on the door, my fists pounding against the wood, but it wouldn't budge. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath billowing before me, thick with despair. I turned back to the mirror, and the faces were now screaming, their mouths wide open, their expressions twisted in agony. The woman stepped closer to the glass, her hand pressed against it, as if trying to reach through. In that moment, I understood. They were trapped, and somehow, I had become part of their story. The mirror pulsed, and I staggered forward, instinctively reaching out. I had to help them. I had to break the cycle. But as I touched the glass again, a surge of energy coursed through me, and I felt myself being pulled in, the darkness enveloping me. A final scream echoed in my ears, and then, silence. Story 5, Silent Watchers Beyond the Line. The night draped itself over the desert like a suffocating shroud, concealing everything under a blanket of darkness that seemed almost alive. I had been standing at the edge of the abandoned stretch of highway, a half-consumed bottle of water clutched in my hand as I stared into the vastness. The stars twinkled in the sky, indifferent to the fate of those who traversed the unforgiving terrain below. Each gust of wind whispered secrets of the men and women who risked everything to cross borders unseen. I remembered my last night in the station, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the monotonous chatter of my colleagues, and the endless paperwork that suffocated the sense of duty I once felt. I had been a part of the U.S. Border Patrol for nearly 3 years, stationed at a remote outpost, far from the comforts of home. Every day, I patrolled the parched landscape, scanning for signs of those who dared to cross into our country. It was never just a simple task. Each encounter carried the weight of morality and consequence, but what lay beneath the surface was far more sinister. Something shifted in the air, unnerving in a way that set my senses on edge. I glanced down at my watch, 3:23 a.m. I should have been back at the station, but I felt drawn to the raw fear that pulsed around me. The desert wasn't just empty, it was teeming with stories of those who had vanished without a trace, their whispers haunting the night. The radio crackled, pulling me from my thoughts. "Unit 45, do you copy?" It was Rick, my partner. His voice was strained, rife with urgency. "Copy," I replied, tension coiling in my stomach. "Possible activity near your location. Reports of several individuals moving through Sector 12. Proceed with caution." I could almost hear the unease in his voice. I tightened my grip on the water bottle, the plastic creaking under the pressure. "Roger that. I'm on my way." The truck's engine roared to life as I hopped in, the headlights cutting through the pitch darkness. The vastness of the desert felt like an expanse of dread, stretching on forever. I drove through the shifting sands, the tires crunching against gravel and rock, each bump echoing my own escalating heartbeat. As I neared Sector 12, the world outside the truck transformed. Shadows danced along the road, twisting and turning as if they had a life of their own. I parked the vehicle behind a cluster of boulders, the engine's rumble falling silent. The quiet that followed was unsettling. It felt as though the desert itself was holding its breath. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam sweeping over the barren ground, searching for anything that might betray a presence. I stepped out of the truck, the cold air biting at my skin, adding to the unease gnawing at my insides. I could hear the distant sound of wind, but other than that, the silence was oppressive. In the shadows, I caught a glimpse of movement. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. 2 figures, blurred by the darkness, were making their way cautiously across the desert floor. They were too thin, their desperation palpable even from this distance. "Hey!" I shouted, raising my hands to signal them to stop. "Border Patrol." They hesitated, glancing at each other before bolting in opposite directions. Adrenaline surged through me as I lunged after the nearest one, my heart pounding so hard I feared it might burst. The figure stumbled, falling to the ground, and I approached cautiously. "Stay down," I commanded, my voice a mix of authority and fear. She looked up, her eyes wide and panicked. "Please, don't hurt me. We just want to get to America." I gazed down at her, caught between the woman's plea and the law I had sworn to uphold. "Where's the other one?" I demanded, scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. She shook her head, tears streaming down her dirty cheeks. "I don't know. We got separated." "Get up. We need to move," I said, my gut telling me that the danger had only begun. I helped her to her feet, and we started toward the truck. As we reached the vehicle, a shout ripped through the night, piercing the silence like a knife. "Officer! Over here!" Rick's voice echoed. I turned to see him emerge from the shadows, his flashlight illuminating the ground. But there was something off about his demeanor. His face was pale, and his eyes darted into the abyss of the desert. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice quaking with apprehension. I think I saw something. A group, but they weren't alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood at attention. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, a deep growl resonated from the darkness, low and guttural, sending a shiver down my spine. The air turned electric with a sense of impending doom. The woman clutched my arm, her breath quick and shallow. "Get in the truck," I ordered, my mind racing. "Stay low." As we scrambled inside, Rick's flashlight swept across the dunes, revealing shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally. The growl came again, closer now, as if the desert itself were a predator lying in wait. My heart thudded in my chest as I backed the truck away from the scene, the engine's roar cutting through the foreboding silence. I stole a glance at Rick, whose eyes were wide with fear, and the woman clutched my arm tighter, her nails digging into my skin. We were far from safe. The desert had awakened, and it felt hungry. I awoke the next morning to the sound of the rustling leaves outside my window, a faint memory of last night's unsettling experience still clinging to my mind. The sun barely crested the horizon, casting a muted glow across the room. I had barely slept, haunted by visions of the men I had encountered, their expressions twisted in confusion and desperation. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to me like a shadow. After a quick breakfast, I drove out to the desert, my heart racing with anticipation and dread. The Border Patrol station lay just a few miles ahead, an unimposing structure amidst the vastness of the arid landscape. I had been working there for 3 months, convinced that the job would be straightforward, a mere stepping stone. The reality, however, had been anything but. Each day blurred into the next, punctuated by the same routine, patrols, checks, and the occasional apprehension. As I pulled into the lot, I noticed a subtle change in atmosphere. The air felt heavier, weighted by an unspoken tension. My colleagues greeted me with tight smiles, their eyes darting toward the horizon where the sun had begun its ascent. The supervisor, a grizzled man named Thompson, stood with a cup of coffee in hand, staring into the distance as if he were trying to pierce through something unseen. "Morning," I said, attempting to shake off the unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. "Got a busy day ahead," he replied, his voice low. "Heard there's been increased activity in Sector 14. I nodded, trying to mask my discomfort. The desert had a way of concealing secrets, and I felt as though we were always on the brink of uncovering something we weren't meant to find. The morning dragged on as I patrolled the area, the sun climbing higher, blaring down with an intensity that made the asphalt shimmer. Despite the warmth, I felt a chill crawling up my spine, a reminder of the men from last night. The landscape seemed to shift, shadows moving where no shadows should be, and I caught myself glancing warily over my shoulder. It was during my afternoon shift that everything changed. I was stationed near a remote section of the border when I noticed something out of the ordinary, a cluster of rocks that seemed disturbed, as if someone had hastily covered something up. My heart rate quickened as I approached, the soft crunch of gravel beneath my boots echoing in the silence. As I neared the rocks, I knelt down, brushing away the grit to reveal a small, torn backpack. It was worn and weathered, but I could see that it had once belonged to a child. My stomach twisted as I rummaged through it, finding a tattered toy and some faded photographs of a family. My mind raced with the implications. What had happened here? Before I could process it further, a rustling came from behind me. I whipped around, heart pounding, scanning the desolate expanse. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting elongated shadows that danced around me. An eerie silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant call of a crow. "Hello?" I called out, my voice breaking slightly. "Is anyone there?" Nothing. Just the whispering wind. I felt the hairs on my neck stand on end, and I turned back to the backpack, my instinct screaming that I was now alone. A chill ran through me, and a voice in my head urged me to leave, to return to the safety of the station. But as I stood to leave, I caught a glimpse of something moving at the edge of my vision. It was fleeting, almost like a mirage, but unmistakable, a figure darting behind a cluster of cacti. I took a cautious step forward, curiosity battling with fear. The desert had a way of breeding nightmares, and I was about to walk right into one. I moved stealthily, the backpack clutched tightly in my hands. I approached the cacti, heart hammering against my rib cage, calling out once more, "I see you. Come out." My voice echoed, tinged with a desperation I couldn't hide. As if in response, the figure stepped into view. It was a boy no more than 10, dirty and trembling, with wide eyes that held a mixture of fear and defiance. He looked like he had been living in the wild for days, maybe weeks. "Are you lost?" I asked gently, kneeling down to his level. "Where are your parents?" He didn't answer. Instead, he glanced past me, as if sensing something I could not. A look of terror washed over his face, and he took a step back, trembling even more. "Run!" he shouted suddenly, his voice quaking. "They're coming. They'll get you." Before I could respond, I heard the distant sound of an engine, growing louder by the second. My stomach dropped as I realized what it was. In this part of the desert, the sound could only belong to border patrol vehicles. They were coming for him. I grabbed the boy's arm instinctively, and together, we fled toward the rocks. "We need to hide," I urged, pushing him down behind a large boulder where we could remain unseen. My heart raced as I peered out, watching as 2 patrol vehicles rolled into view, their sirens screaming. The agents spilled out, shouting commands into the radio. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find us, that they wouldn't see the boy trembling beside me. In that moment, I felt the weight of the choices I had made, the choices that had led me here. I felt a darkness closing in, not just from the agents searching for the boy, but something deeper, something from the very heart of the desert itself. I could sense it thrummed in the air, a warning that this was just the beginning. The night draped the landscape in inky darkness, broken only by the occasional flicker of a distant flashlight. I huddled in the tight confines of the abandoned shack, its rotting wooden beams creaking under the weight of the secrets it harbored. The air inside was thick with mildew, and I could taste the dust in my throat, dry and gritty. I was a trespasser in every sense, hiding from the world outside, a world that had become increasingly dangerous ever since the Border Patrol had intensified their operations. It had been nearly 3 days since I had fled my home in search of safety. I had believed the journey would be quick, a mere sprint through the shadows that separated my life from that of my brother, Miguel. But that was before I realized the risks lining the path. As the sun set each day, I felt the weight of dread settle on my shoulders like a heavy cloak, tightening around me with every passing minute. Tonight, the pulse of anxiety quickened in my chest, a tangible thrum that echoed the distant thuds of boots against the dirt. I pressed my back against the damp wall, hoping the shadows would swallow me whole. Outside, the border patrol seemed to be particularly vigilant. I could hear their voices, a low murmur punctuated with laughter that echoed eerily in the silence of the night. They were close, too close. I had heard stories of what happened to those who crossed paths with them. Tales of migrants caught and sent back, or worse, lost in unforgiving terrain, their screams swallowed by the desert. My heart raced with the thought that I was just one misstep away from joining their ranks. I thought about Miguel. I needed to get to him. A sudden rustle outside shattered the calm of the night, sending a jolt of adrenaline through my body. I squinted through a cracked window, the fractured glass barely allowing me a view of the outside world. My heart sank as I saw a flashlight beam dancing erratically, sweeping across the ground like a hunting wolf. Panic fluttered in my chest as I crouched lower, trying to quiet my ragged breathing. The voice grew closer, and I strained to make out the words. He could be anywhere. We can't let him slip through our fingers. He's not worth the trouble, but we can't take chances. The tension in my muscles coiled tighter. They were talking about me. I knew it. I had witnessed too much, had seen too many faces vanish, too many people swept away by the night, unable to return. I glanced at my surroundings, more out of instinct than strategy. The shack had been abandoned for years. The walls bore the scars of weather and neglect, but they provided some semblance of cover. I waited, every nerve in my body screaming at me to move, but I couldn't. If I stepped outside, I would be caught. If I stayed, I would be trapped. The uncertainty gnawed at me as I listened to the voices grow louder. I'll check the old shack. The voice was gruff, authoritative. My heart raced. They were coming for me. Every creeping sound outside felt like a countdown, a slow march toward the inevitable. I looked around desperately for an escape, but there was none. The only other wall was a crumbling facade, barely holding itself up, a remnant of what was once a place of refuge. I listened intently, the pounding of my heartbeat drowning out the rustling wind. Then the door creaked open, a haunting groan that sliced through the silence. It was ajar for just a moment, as if inviting the darkness inside. I held my breath, praying for the owner to change their mind. The light beam cut through the room, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the air like spirits of those long forgotten. I shrank into the corner, an involuntary shiver racing down my spine. Nothing here, I heard him say, disappointment lacing his words. Let's check the other side. I exhaled, the rush of air escaping my lungs making a soft sound that felt like a scream in the stillness. For a moment, I dared to hope that they had lost interest, that I could slip away into the night, but then I heard another voice, softer but laced with menace. Don't be so sure. They're clever. The tone sent a chill through my bones. They always find their way back. Their words gnawed in my mind, twisting my thoughts into knots. The fear of discovery clawed at me, and suddenly, the darkness of the shack felt like a coffin closing around me. I needed to escape. I waited as long as I could, counting the seconds, praying for an opportunity. The voices faded momentarily, and temptation tugged at me like a siren's call. I peered through the crack again and saw the flashlight's beam bounce off the rusted remains of an old truck parked nearby, a relic of a different time. They had crossed to the other side. Mustering every ounce of courage, I took a deep breath and pushed the door slightly ajar, careful to not make a sound. As I stepped outside, the chill of the night wrapped around me. The shadows lengthened, and I melted into the darkness like a wraith. With every step I took, the fear of being caught stung me with relentless urgency. I thought of Miguel, of the promise I made to keep him safe. I would not let his fate intertwine with mine, not here, not now. The whispers of the patrol echoed in my mind as I vanished into the night, driven by the hope that the next chapter of my story would not end here. The nights in the desert stretched on like the shadows of the mountains, a vast emptiness swallowing sound as I paced beneath a bruised sky. A flickering campfire was my only companion, casting ghostly figures across the rough terrain. I could feel the weight of the last few days pressing down on me, an anchor that threatened to pull me into the abyss of despair. I had expected solitude when I set out on this journey. I had expected darkness, but not this profound silence that felt alive, as if the land itself held its breath in anticipation. The border patrol was always close. I could almost sense them, lurking in the distance, waiting for me to make the slightest mistake. Their presence was a persistent ghost at the back of my mind, a reminder that I wasn't crossing just into another country but into a perilous unknown. As the flames crackled, I found myself fixated on the shadows they cast. Each flicker seemed to form grotesque figures that danced just beyond the reach of the light. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thoughts. I was not alone, yet I felt an isolation that scraped against my soul. The vastness of the desert was not just a physical barrier, it was haunting. The night deepened, and I plotted my next move, recalling the advice from the few I had spoken to before leaving home. Stay low, stay in the dark, and keep your wits about you. Easy enough to say, but the reality was drenched in fear. I had heard stories, terrifying tales of those who had vanished without a trace under the relentless sun, swallowed by the unforgiving earth. And I did not want to become another ghost story, whispered around fires like the very one I sat beside. My heart raced with every slight sound, the crack of a twig or the rustling of leaves. I knew I couldn't linger here for long. Keeping to the edge of the desert, away from the main routes, was supposed to be my best strategy, but I felt disoriented. The vastness of the terrain turned the stars above, once so reassuring, into mocking eyes. They twinkled with a kind of indifferent beauty, as if to say that I was utterly insignificant in the grand tapestry of the universe. Finally, I gathered my courage and started walking again, the soles of my worn boots crunching on the gravel. I chose a narrow path that wound deeper into the desert, hoping it would lead me away from the patrols. Each step felt like a gamble, a choice between safety and the unnerving unknown. But I had little option. Remaining stationary only invited danger. As I moved, a low humming sound began to fill the air, a persistent drone that sent chills racing down my spine. I froze, straining to catch the source. The noise grew louder, vibrating through the stillness of the night like the warning of an approaching storm. My gut twisted as I realized it was a plane, possibly a drone, slicing through the dark sky, searching for me and others like me. The drone's shadow drifted across the landscape, momentarily extinguishing the stars above. I pressed myself low against a rock formation, heart pounding in my ears, praying I wouldn't be seen. The hum enveloped me, an oppressive shroud. I kept my eyes trained on the sky, waiting for the telltale flash of lights that would signal the drone's descent, expecting it to sweep the ground below like a spectral scythe. Time seemed to suspend as I crouched there, the fear of discovery gnawing at my resolve. I knew the patrols used advanced technology, thermal imaging to spot heat signatures and night vision to pierce the darkness. If I moved now, I might as well have painted a target on my back. I clung to the rock, feeling the rough surface bite into my palms. The hum grew softer, then faded, but the fear remained, coiling tight in my chest. Moments became hours as I listened to my surroundings. The desert had its own rhythm, and I found myself strangely comforted by the distant calls of coyotes, their mournful howls echoing through the night. But where there were sounds of life, there were also reminders of death. It was the desert, a place of desolation and despair, where souls had been lost and forgotten. I wasn't sure how long I had been crouching when I heard the faint sound of voices, carried on the night breeze. My heart sank. I strained to listen, heart racing as adrenaline surged through my veins. The voices belonged to men, multiple men, drawling and laughing, oblivious to the danger they presented. I couldn't see them yet, but every instinct in me screamed to hide deeper among the rocks. I crawled further back, pressing against the cool stone, my breath shallow as I tried to remain as still as the night around me. The voices grew closer, and soon through the moonlight, I could make out figures moving. They were wearing uniforms, with flashlights cutting through the darkness, sweeping the ground with unchecked confidence. They were searching. I bit my lip, adrenaline coursing through my body, urging me to flee. But where would I go? I had already chosen to venture away from the main paths, away from the chance of rescue and closer to the savage heart of the wilderness. They moved in sync, and for a moment, I wondered if they could smell the fear radiating from me. One of them turned abruptly. "Did you hear that?" His voice was low, but the authority in it sliced through the night. I held my breath, body taut and ready to bolt, heart hammering against my ribs. "Just the wind," another laughed, but his laughter sounded nervous, frayed at the edges. But I could hear it now, all rustling, too deliberate to be dismissed. A promise of danger lurking just beyond the reach of their lights. My stomach turned, and I forced myself to stay quiet, to embrace the stillness, as the shadows danced ominously around me, waiting. As the men grew closer, I closed my eyes, praying that the desert would keep its secrets. The sun hung low on the horizon, bleeding deep oranges and reds across the barren landscape. It was the kind of sunset that made the desert look deceptively inviting. But I knew better. Time had become my enemy, each passing minute amplifying the dread that stirred in the pit of my stomach. I had learned the hard way that beauty could be the prelude to horror. As I sat in the vehicle, its engine sputtering, I wished I had never left the safety of my home. The radio crackled with static, then a terse voice cut through. "All units, we have a report of unauthorized crossings near Sector 5. Keep your eyes peeled." It was the same message playing over and over, creating a loop of paranoia. The Border Patrol had grown increasingly aggressive lately, driven by a fear of the unknown that seemed to lurk just beyond their reach. I had seen the news reports, stories of missing people, whispers of strange happenings in the desolate stretches of land I now traversed. But no one wanted to talk about it openly. The shadows in their eyes told me they knew more than they were letting on. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, feeling the leather crack beneath my fingers. The vehicle's old headlights cast elongated shadows across the landscape, illuminating tufts of dried brush and the occasional rock formation that jutted out like the bones of some long-forgotten beast. I squinted into the distance, hoping to catch any signs of life, any movement that might signal safety. But it was just me, the car, and the creeping night. The voice on the radio returned, this time more urgent. "Repeat. All units were receiving reports of unusual activity near the ridge. Approach with caution." My heart raced as I turned off the engine. The world around me fell silent, the only sound the rush of wind. I stepped out of the vehicle, the gravel crunching beneath my boots as I scanned the horizon. The ridge loomed ahead, an imposing silhouette against the dimming sky. My instinct screamed for me to turn back, to seek refuge in the familiar. But curiosity drove my feet forward, the allure of uncovering the truth outweighing the risk. As I climbed the rocky incline, the air grew heavier, laden with the scent of earth and something else, something metallic, almost sickly sweet. I paused, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. The whispers of the desert felt alive, as if they were warning me of a danger I couldn't yet comprehend. Reaching the top, I crouched behind a cluster of boulders. The view was both breathtaking and terrifying. Below, in the shadow of the ridge, a group of figures moved with an eerie grace. Their silhouettes danced against the fading light, but their faces were obscured. I strained to hear their voices, but only mumbled words reached my ears, indistinct yet charged with a palpable intensity. Then, the sound of a distant vehicle broke the silence, its engine humming to life, puncturing the calm. The figures froze, their heads turning in unison toward the sound. My heart pounded as I ducked further behind the rocks, praying I wouldn't be seen. I had come here seeking answers, but now I feared I had merely stumbled into a trap. Suddenly, the figures scattered, moving with haste as if responding to an unseen signal. I watched helplessly as the headlights of a border patrol truck crested the rise, illuminating the area with a harsh glare. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized the figures weren't simply crossing the border, they were fleeing, and whatever they were fleeing from was now dangerously close. I felt the urge to run, to retreat back down the hill and escape the chaos below. But I was frozen, unable to tear my gaze from the unfolding scene. The patrol officers exited their vehicle, flashlights piercing the darkness. Their voices rose in shouts, commanding and authoritative, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that they were just as afraid as I was. The night deepened, and shadows danced wildly as the officers spread out, searching the area with their beams of light. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my back. I needed to stay hidden, but the weight of my decision pressed heavily on me. I had come to uncover a truth, but now it seemed I was caught in a web far beyond my understanding. One of the officers moved closer, his flashlight swinging dangerously close to my hiding spot. My breath caught in my throat as I pressed my body low against the ground, my heart hammering in my chest. I could see his silhouette, tense and alert, scanning the darkness. It felt as though he could sense my presence, the air thickening with dread. Then a sound shattered the tension, a high-pitched scream echoed across the ridge, primal and raw, sending an icy shiver down my spine. The officers paused, looking at each other, uncertainty etched across their faces. I felt as if the very ground beneath me held its breath, waiting for the next move. That scream was a warning, a cry for help, or perhaps a signal that something unfathomable lurked just beyond the reach of their lights. As fear coursed through my veins, I realized I had to make a choice. I could either remain hidden, an unseen observer in a night filled with terror, or I could venture deeper into the abyss that had already begun to consume me. The answers I sought were not going to wait for me to gather my courage. With a final glance at the chaos below, I made my decision. I would forge ahead, regardless of the shadows intertwining with my fear. Whatever lay ahead, truth or terror, I was ready to face it. Story 6, Depths of the Forgotten Abyss. The sun sank below the horizon, casting long shadows across the deck of the USS Valor as I stood at the railing, holding a cup of lukewarm coffee. The ship rocked gently, swaying with the rhythm of the ocean, but my mind felt heavier than the rolling waves. It had been nearly 3 weeks since we left port, and the monotony of life aboard had begun to wear me down. The crew had settled into a routine. We drilled, maintained our equipment, and listened to the radio. But another presence lingered in the salt-laden air, an anxiety that clung to my skin. That afternoon, the sky had shifted from a serene blue to a sullen gray. The forecast warned us of a storm, but nautical life had its own calendar, dictated more by the whims of the sea than by human constraints. As darkness wrapped around the ship, its cold fingers creeping into my bones, I could not help but feel an unsettling anticipation. Something was off, the kind of feeling that gnawed at the back of your mind even when you tried to rationalize it away. "Hey, Simon." The voice of my friend and fellow deckhand, Carter, broke my reverie. He bounded up beside me, a smirk plastered across his face, betraying the underlying tension that haunted the crew. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Or maybe you're just missing land." "Just thinking," I replied, forcing a smile. Carter always tried to lighten the mood, but he didn't know how dark my thoughts had grown. We leaned against the railing, and for a moment, I wanted to believe that we were merely two sailors sharing a laugh beneath the gathering storm. Thinking, "Huh? That's dangerous out here." "You'll scare the fish," he chuckled, but his laughter caught in his throat when the wind howled through the rigging. It was an ominous sound, reminiscent of a wounded creature crying out in the night. I shivered involuntarily. "Let's head inside," I suggested, eyeing the clouds that seemed to bulge and twist, coiling like angry serpents. Together, we made our way down to the common area, where a few of the crew members sat around tables, sipping their drinks and swapping stories. The flickering overhead lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, and I felt that creeping sensation again, as if eyes were watching us from the darkened corners. I heard whispers. One of the engineers, Miller, said. He leaned forward, eyes wide. "Last night, from the port side." Sounded like someone calling out. No one else heard it. A chuckle rippled through the group, but it felt forced. Whispers on a ship? The thought sent a chill racing down my spine. I had heard stories of sailors who succumbed to madness, their minds unraveling like frayed ropes, but I never thought I would entertain such nonsense. "Probably just the wind," Carter said, trying to dismiss the tension. But deep down, I felt it, the weight of the ocean pressing against the hull, the stories buried beneath the waves, the ghosts of men who had sailed before us. I forced myself to laugh, but the sound felt hollow. That night, as the storm broke, the ship shuddered under the relentless assault of wind and rain. The walls creaked and groaned like an ancient beast waking from a long slumber. I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the chaos outside. The storm raged, and I could hardly distinguish the waves crashing against the hull from the anguished screams echoing in my mind. Sleep evaded me, and I rose, driven by a curiosity I couldn't quite name. I pulled on my jacket and stepped out into the tumult. The world was a whirling mass of rain and darkness, the air thick with salt and fear. I made my way toward the stern, where I could see the frenzied white caps illuminated by flashes of lightning. Then I heard it, a voice carried by the wind, low and melodic, yet tinged with an undercurrent of despair. It called my name, soft like a lover's whisper, and I froze. "Simon," it beckoned, pulling me toward the edge of the ship. I shook my head, trying to chase away the illusion, but the voice persisted, weaving a spell of dread and allure. My heart raced as I crept closer, peering into the churning depths below. The waves thrashed violently against the ship's hull, but amidst the chaos, I thought I saw something, a figure, pale and glimmering, rising from the depths. In that moment, fear overcame curiosity. I stumbled backward, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest like a caged animal. The storm howled around me, but all I could hear was that voice, still singing my name, a siren call that would not relent. I turned on my heel and fled back inside, heart racing and breath coming in shallow gasps. I slammed the door behind me, leaning against it as if I could somehow barricade the horrors outside. The crew had gathered in the common area, their faces pale and wide-eyed as they exchanged whispered fears. "What's going on?" Carter asked, his brow knitted with concern. I heard something," I stuttered, my mind racing back to the figure in the water. A voice. It called my name. The room fell silent. The only sound was the storm's fury battering against the ship, an angry reminder of the world outside. "Just the wind," Miller said, though his voice trembled. But deep down, I knew. The ocean held its secrets close, and I was beginning to sense that this voyage would unearth far more than we had bargained for. The piercing shriek of the alarm jolted me awake, and I found myself staring at the dim, metallic ceiling of the cramped bunk. The sound echoed through the corridors of the USS Blackfin, a submarine that had long since begun to feel like a prison. I wiped the sleep from my eyes, adrenaline surging through me like the cold Atlantic waters that surrounded us. The lights flickered, casting long shadows that danced ominously along the walls. "Report to the control room," came the voice over the intercom. It was Captain Reyes, his tone clipped and urgent. There was no time to wonder what was happening. The command cut through the fog of grogginess. I scrambled out of my bunk, heart racing as I pulled on my jumpsuit. The metallic tang of the air was mingled with something else, something foul and organic that seemed to cling to the walls. The corridor was alive with movement. Crew members rushed past me, their faces taut with anxiety and confusion. I joined the tide, my boots echoing against the steel floor. As I reached the control room, the atmosphere shifted. The hum of machinery was louder than usual, vibrating with the tension that suffused the air. Inside, I found the crew gathered around the main screen. Captain Reyes stood at the helm, his brow furrowed in concentration. I peered over the shoulders of my fellow sailors, trying to catch a glimpse of what had them so riled. The screen displayed sonar readings, the digital beeps punctuating the silence like a heartbeat. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice barely breaking through the cacophony. "Something's out there," Reyes replied, eyes locked on the screen. "We're picking up something massive on the sonar, but we can't identify it." A collective breath seemed to hang in the air, the weight of the unknown pressing down on us. I felt a chill creep up my spine. The ocean had always been a realm of mystery, but this felt different. An unspoken fear lurked beneath the surface of our bravado. "What do you mean massive?" someone called from the back. "Like a whale?" Reyes shook his head, the look in his eyes grim. "No. This is far too deep and far too large. It's been moving erratically, and now it's heading straight for us." Panic rippled through the crew, a silent acknowledgement that we were out of our depths, caught in the maw of something we couldn't begin to understand. I caught a glimpse of the sonar, lines flickering wildly across the screen, a jagged pulse that seemed to coincide with the racing beat of my own heart. "Prepare for battle stations," Reyes ordered, his voice cutting through the rising tide of anxiety. "We don't know what we're dealing with, but we have to be ready." The clattering of feet filled the room as the crew scrambled to their posts. I took my place at the communication console, fingers trembling slightly as I began running through protocols. My mind raced with questions, but there was no time to voice them. We were in a fight for survival now, and fear only fed the dark undercurrents that threatened to engulf us. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as we maintained our vigil over the sonar. The image of the massive shape loomed larger, a shadow against the backdrop of the ocean floor. There was something impossibly unsettling about it, a rawness that made my stomach churn. It felt alive, a primal force that defied logic and reason. "Status update," Reyes demanded, his tone unyielding. We were all on edge, grasping at the threads of our sanity. I turned to my console, trying to focus on the readings, but they were becoming increasingly erratic, fluctuations that mirrored the chaos brewing within me. I glanced at the crew around me, their faces pale, eyes haunted. Each of us bore the weight of our shared fear, pushing us closer to the brink. And then, the lights flickered again, plunging us into partial darkness. Emergency red lights kicked in, casting an eerie glow. The air thickened with tension, a tangible thing that coiled around us like a vice. I could feel the heartbeat of the submarine thrumming in my chest, a reminder of how fragile our existence was beneath the weight of the ocean. "Power fluctuations," someone shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "The auxiliary generator's failing. Stabilize it." Reyes barked, but the command felt hollow. We were at the mercy of forces unknown. I blinked against the red light, struggling to keep my focus as the sonar blips morphed into wild patterns. And then, just as suddenly, the massive shape seemed to change course, barreling toward us. The sound of metal creaking echoed ominously through the hull, as if the very submarine were groaning under the pressure of the deep. "Brace for impact," Reyes yelled, and before I could react, the pressure hit us like a wall. The submarine shuddered violently, sending me sprawling against the console. Alarms blared, the air filled with shouts and confusion. In that moment, I caught sight of something moving outside the viewports, an enormous shadow, gliding through the water like a predator on the hunt. Its form was indistinct, a blur of darkness against the murky depths, but something in its movement stirred primal fears within me. What could it be? My mind raced with 1,000 possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. I had signed up for adventure, but this was a nightmare unfolding in real time, a dance with death beneath the waves. "Get us moving!" Reyes shouted, regaining his footing. "Now!" A chorus of voices filled the room as we scrambled, trying to regain control. We were mere men, trapped in a metal coffin beneath the ocean, and whatever the thing was, it felt like it was toying with us. Fear coursed through my veins, and I realized we were not just battling an external threat, we were fighting against a terror that threatened to tear us apart from the inside. As we struggled against the chaos, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, lurking just beyond the reach of our feeble lights. The ocean was alive with whispers, and I could almost hear the siren call of the abyss. It beckoned, promising an end to our suffering, yet I knew deep down that the end would be far worse than any of us could imagine. The ocean lay before me, a deceptively serene blanket of blue that stretched infinitely toward the horizon. Beneath its surface, I felt the weight of secrets lurking, shifting like shadows just out of reach. It had been 3 days since we had discovered the wreckage. Each night, while the boat rocked gently on the waves, the sound of my own heartbeat had become a chorus of dread in my ears. The first night had been the worst. My dreams were punctured by images of the sunken vessel, its rusted hull jutting out of the sandy floor like the bones of some grotesque leviathan. I could still recall the way the water had shimmered over it, casting strange reflections that played tricks on the mind, even in the dim light of our lantern. The other crew members had dismissed my unease, laughing it off as fatigue from the dive. They were eager to explore, to claim what treasures lay hidden below. I felt like an outsider in my own skin, a lone voice of warning amidst their bravado. On the second day, we suited up for the dive. As I fastened my oxygen tank and adjusted my mask, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the depths. The ocean had always felt alive to me, but now it felt like a predator, patient and waiting. I watched as the others exchanged excited murmurs, their faces lit with anticipation. I thought of turning back, but the weight of the crew's enthusiasm pressed against me like the salty waves crashing against the hull. We descended, the world above us swallowed by the dark. I had always found solace in the depths, cradled by the embrace of the water. This time, however, I felt a shiver race down my spine as we neared the wreck. Visibility dwindled as we swam deeper, the water growing colder with every passing meter. I could see the ghostly outline of the ship loom ahead, a skeletal structure that whispered of dangers unseen. Curiosity mingled with trepidation as we approached the wreck. Its once proud form lay twisted and broken, entangled in seaweed and coral. My lantern beam danced across the surface, illuminating portholes that seemed to stare back at us like empty eyes. I glanced at my companions. Their expressions were a mixture of awe and greed. They had not yet grasped the specter of despair that clung to this place like an unshakable shroud. As we ventured inside the hull, the water around us thickened with a palpable tension. My heart raced with each passing moment. The interior was a wreckage of memories, old equipment lay discarded, and the air was heavy with the scent of rust and decay. I told myself to breathe, to focus on the task at hand. We were here to document, to uncover the past. But the deeper we delved, the more the shadows twisted. Each creak of the ship resonated in the silence, echoing like a distant warning. I paused, my lungs burning with the effort of holding my breath, a sudden instinct urging me to turn back. But the others pressed forward, and I found myself compelled to follow. Suddenly, a chilling sound reverberated through the walls, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to echo from the very bowels of the ship. My pulse quickened as I turned to the others, panic surging in my chest. But they were undeterred, their faces set with determination. "We have to see what it was," one of my companions called, excitement bubbling in his voice. I hesitated, caught between fear and the thrill of exploration. Against my better judgment, I followed them deeper into the wreck. As we reached a narrow corridor, the water grew colder still, an unnatural chill that sank into my bones. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced along the walls. The sound came again, more pronounced this time, a throaty growl mingled with a low hiss, like the voice of some ancient sea creature awakening from a long slumber. It reverberated through the wreck, and I felt it vibrate in my chest, a primal instinct screaming at me to flee. But the others pressed on, their laughter ringing hollow in the oppressive gloom. I trailed behind, the taste of salt and fear suddenly bitter on my tongue. A sinking despair filled my heart as we turned a corner and found ourselves in a large chamber, the remnants of forgotten dreams swirling around us. Then I saw it, a glimpse of movement flickered in the corner of my eye. I turned just in time to catch the shadow darting away, too quick to fully comprehend. It was not just the dimness of the wreck that unnerved me, it was the realization that we were now alone. I raised my flashlight, the beam cutting through the murky water, but the creature was already gone. A primal fear clawed at my insides, fighting against the fragile thread of reason that urged me to stay calm. I looked back at the others, who were rifling through the debris, their faces alight with greedy exhilaration. They hadn't noticed the shadow, hadn't felt the encroaching darkness that surrounded us. The growl came again, this time closer, a sound so raw that it sent vibrations through the hall. Panic surged, igniting every instinct within me. I grabbed the shoulder of one of my companions, but he shrugged me off, too absorbed in his treasure hunt. We needed to leave. Now! With a burst of adrenaline, I turned and swam back toward the entry, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears. I could feel the weight of the water closing in, pulling me down into its depths. The growl echoed again, closer, reverberating through the very walls of the ship, and I pushed myself faster, desperate to escape. Just as I reached the corridor, I turned back for a last look. The others were still engrossed in their search, oblivious to the danger looming around them. I hesitated, a part of me wanting to shout for them to follow, but the rest of me screamed to get out before it was too late. With one last glance, I propelled myself forward, swimming with every ounce of strength I had left. The water churned around me as I forced myself against the currents, the shadows of the wreck fading behind me. The growl surged once more, a warning that sent me into a frenzy, and I surged upward, breaking the surface just as darkness consumed the depths below. I gasped for air, my heart racing, the salty taste of the ocean mingling with the bitter remnants of fear. But even as I floated, staring back at the dusky outline of the wreck, I knew whatever lay beneath would not let us go so easily. The ocean was alive, and it was hungry. The ocean lay restless beneath a sullen sky as I stood on the deck, the salty breeze stinging my skin. The rhythmic clanging of the ship's bell echoed in my ears, a solemn reminder that time was slipping away. The haunting memories of the past few days played on an endless loop in my mind, disjointed images of bloodied water and the faces of my crew twisted in fear. The unease that settled in my stomach felt as deep as the ocean itself. Night fell quickly, shrouding the vessel in an eerie darkness, the kind that made the heart race and the mind wander. I stared into the swirling blackness of the waves, feeling the weight of the ocean pressing against me as if it were alive, watching. I had been a marine biologist for nearly a decade, devoted to understanding the mysteries of the deep, but now I felt like an intruder in a world that harbored horrors beyond my comprehension. "Hey, you all right?" Mags asked, her voice barely cutting through the wind. She approached me with a frown, concern etched on her face. Her red hair whipped about in the gusts, framing her pale skin that seemed to glow against the dark backdrop. "Just thinking," I replied, forcing a smile. "Thinking or worrying?" Mags pressed, her eyes narrowing. "You know this is just a phase. We'll get through it." I wanted to believe her. The uneasiness had settled not only in my gut but in my very bones, a premonition of something dreadful lurking below the surface of the water. I remembered the way the ocean had roared that first night, the guttural growls rising from the depths, followed by the cries of the men who had succumbed to whatever lay beneath. I just can't shake the feeling that something is down there, I admitted, my voice lowering. Something that doesn't want us here. Mags crossed her arms, a shiver coursing through her. You're not going to let that old legend get to you, are you? The siren? It's just a story to scare sailors. I wanted to scoff, to dismiss it as easily as she had, but the legend had been threaded through our conversations more than I liked. A creature that lured men to their doom with enchanting songs, bending the very nature of the ocean to its will. But I couldn't dismiss the darkness we had encountered. Something malevolent and hungry moved in the depths. As the night deepened, the air turned heavy with anticipation. The crew drifted below deck, seeking solace from the cold, but I remained on the deck, drawn to the water's edge. The moon hummed low, casting an ethereal glow on the surface, distorting my reflection into a grotesque mask. My mind began to play tricks, forming shapes in the undulating waves, whispering secrets that pricked at my sanity. Suddenly, an echoing splash broke the silence, sending a jolt through me. I rushed to the railing, my heart pounding as I scanned the dark waters. Another splash came, then silence. I strained to make out any movement, holding my breath. The ocean seemed to hold its own, waiting for the next intrusion. Mags! I shouted, my voice trembling. Did you hear that? She appeared at the doorway, her expression pale. What's happening? I think something is out there, I stammered, barely able to form the words. Before she could respond, another sound pierced the stillness. This time it was closer, unmistakably a voice, haunting and melodic, rising from the depths. A chill swept through me, wrapping around my spine like icy fingers. The song drew me, its allure tugging at my very core. I felt a compulsion to lean over the edge, to dive into the depths and give in to the haunting call. Mags, I gasped, panic rising within me. We have to go inside, now. But as I turned, I found her standing at the railing, entranced, her eyes wide and unblinking. The siren song seemed to wrap around her, pulling her into the night. Mags, no! I screamed, rushing to pull her back. The moment my hands clasped around her wrist, she jolted as if waking from a trance. What? What's happening? Get away from the edge. She stumbled back, her breath quickening, but the horror in her eyes mirrored my own. I don't know what that was, but it was beautiful. Beautiful? It nearly dragged you under. The moment lingered, the tension thickening the air. We both stood at the edge, breathing heavily, as the last echoes of the song faded into the night, leaving only the sound of the waves crashing against the hull. Maybe we should check the sonar, Mags suggested, her voice shaky but steadying. I nodded, moving to the control room, each step heavy with dread. The screen flickered to life, illuminating our faces in pale green. Tension hung thick as we scanned the readings. The depth displayed a steady flow of data, but then it shifted, a blip appeared, flickering across the screen. What the hell is that? I murmured, pointing at the monitor. The blip expanded, pulsating in rhythm with the heartbeats of the ship and our own, a dark mass moving beneath us, seemingly aware of our presence. Panic surged through me as I realized it was moving toward us. Mags, we need to move. Before she could respond, the ship shuddered violently, throwing us to the ground. I grabbed for the console, scrambling to my feet as the outside world erupted into chaos. The sound of wood splintering echoed around us, accompanied by a cacophony of screams coming from the deck. I met Mags's terrified gaze. Whatever that is, it's coming for us. We sprinted toward the exit, the ship groaning as if in pain, muffled voices rising in panic. As we burst out onto the deck, The scene that met us was a nightmare come to life. Crew members flailed in the water, shadows flickering beneath them, their screams transformed into gurgled pleas. "Mags, we have to." But before I could finish, the ship lurched violently again. The deck tilted beneath us, and I grabbed Mags's arm, pulling her toward the lifeboats. But the ocean was no longer inviting. It was a dark mass, a living entity threatening to swallow us whole. My heart raced as the darkness beneath the waves roiled, and I knew we were no longer just at the mercy of the depths. Whatever had called to us was awake, and it would not let us go. The sea was a vast, restless expanse, its surface restless under the pale moonlight that struggled to penetrate the thick clouds above. My heart raced in tandem with the waves, each crash against the hull echoing the dread that had settled deep within my gut. It had been days since we had lost radio contact, and the silence that enveloped us felt more like a shroud than a veil of peace. I stood on the deck, the salty spray biting against my skin, barely able to shake the feeling of ice watching from beneath the black water. The crew had tried to carry on as if everything was normal, but I could see the fear mapping out their faces, the way their laughter faded into awkward silence whenever the subject of our situation came up. It was the absence of sound that unnerved me most, a reminder that we were surrounded by something unfathomable and ancient. The search for the missing crew members had become a futile endeavor, and I had reluctantly joined the others in abandoning the hope of their return. The ocean had swallowed them whole, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was merely the ocean doing its duty or something darker lurking beneath the surface. Night after night, dreams of their faces haunted my sleep, ice white with terror, though I remembered nothing of the exact moments before they vanished. I felt as if I were on the cusp of a revelation, one that danced just beyond my reach, taunting me. I pushed the thought aside and headed towards the control room. Ed, our first mate, was hunched over the navigation console, his fingers tapping nervously against the touch screen. He looked up at me, his expression a cross between worry and anger, as if he had been caught doing something he shouldn't. "You can't keep doing this," he said, his voice low yet strained. "We need to make a decision. We need to turn back." I shook my head, my resolve hardening. "We can't abandon them. Not yet. There's still a chance." His eyes narrowed. "Chance. The deeper we go, the worse it gets. I've seen the charts. There's nothing out here but a whole lot of nothing. We're wasting fuel, and the provisions, they won't last much longer." "Then we'll be careful," I insisted. "We have to keep looking. We owe it to them." Ed sighed, his frustration palpable. "You're playing with fire, and you don't even realize it. What if?" "Enough," I snapped, the weight of my own fear spilling out in anger. "I will not abandon them. You and the others can do what you want, but I won't leave them behind." With that, I stormed out of the control room, the door swinging shut behind me. I could feel Ed's eyes on my back, a mixture of disbelief and pity. What did he know about commitment? I couldn't bear to think of the consequences, not when my mind was flooded with memories and images of their faces, the way they joked and laughed, their camaraderie. They deserved better than to be left as fodder for the lurking abyss. As the hours slid by, the only thing that filled the silence was the sound of the boat cutting through waves. I took a moment to breathe and steadied myself, trying to block out the growing turbulence in my mind. I found myself pacing the deck, eyes scanning the horizon. The dark waters seemed to stretch endlessly, almost as if they were mocking me with their vastness. Each wave whispered secrets, urging me to draw nearer, to listen closely. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural sound emanating from the depths below. I froze, peering into the inky blackness, certain I must have imagined it. But then came another, deeper this time, reverberating through the hull like a monstrous heartbeat. My pulse quickened, a primal instinct clawing at my throat. This was not the wind or the waves. Something was out there, and it wasn't merely the ocean. Did you hear that? I called to the crew, my voice shaky. Ed emerged from the control room once more, his face pale. "What are you talking about?" "I heard something. Like a growl. Or a hum." "You're losing it," he muttered, though a flicker of doubt flitted behind his eyes. "Just, let's get back inside." "It's late." But I couldn't shake the feeling. The air felt charged with tension, the kind that silenced everything. It roiled in my gut, and I knew I had to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight, I crept towards the edge of the boat, peering over the side. The water shimmered with an otherworldly glow, something ethereal, and yet the darkness loomed around it like a predator lurking in the shadows. The sound came again, a deep, echoing rumble, followed by an unnatural silence. My heart thundered in my chest as I trained the flashlight on the water, the beam slicing through the dark. And then, I saw it. A flash of something long and serpentine, glistening in the pallid light, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. My breath caught, and I staggered back, mind reeling. "Did you see that?" I yelled, turning to Ed. He had joined me, his skepticism replaced with wide-eyed horror. "See what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before I could respond, the boat rocked violently, throwing us both off balance. The sound intensified, a cacophony of thrashing water and strange, alien wails that filled the night. Panic set in as crew members burst onto the deck, their faces pale with dread. I could feel the ocean stirring, an angry beast awakening beneath us, its depth hiding a terror beyond comprehension. In that instant, I knew we had gone too far. Whatever had taken my friends was coming for us now, and there would be no escape. The weight of the ocean pressed down on me, and I stumbled backward in fear, the darkness laughing quietly as we realized we were not alone.